We now move to the second question area without notice, questions for the Minister for External Relations. And the first question is from Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Further to written questions earlier about credit reference agencies, will the Minister provide an update as to the progress in delivering data to credit reference agencies in the UK, including whether the one issue highlighted as outstanding regarding data sharing has now been solved?
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, it's not now not yet been solved. My officers continue to work with primarily two credit reference agencies, and the difficulty that we are trying to overcome is the use of the information once those credit reference agencies have got Jersey-based data, because the uses that they could put it to in the United Kingdom are subtly but importantly different from the uses that we in this Assembly have said that they could put it to, primarily around law enforcement. So there are two issues that we continue to work on. One is that with the credit reference agencies, and secondly is the internal systems that we're working on as well.
Supplementary?
Thank you, sir. Notwithstanding, obviously, there's a keen kind of negotiation position the Minister must hold. Given the public interest in following the progress on this, will the Minister commit to a communications plan which would include sharing progress or the current status of the project perhaps on a page on the government website, so those who are interested in seeing it know the last update provided by the Minister in one easy-to-find place?
Minister.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I am aware of islanders who, like me, share a frustration that there are certain credit cards which are not accessible to them because of this issue. Those credit cards are quite valuable because of points that they buy you in all sorts of various schemes. Islanders who perhaps have more struggled with credit cards, there are new providers on island, but I recognise that some of those really valuable cards are not yet available to islanders. So I will provide such an update as the Deputy requests.
Deputy Reneth.
So, a question about open banking. The open banking standard has been widely adopted across the EU and UK. So is the Minister considering mandating participation in the open banking framework for the benefit of Ireland consumers and businesses and for fostering innovation, as has happened across the EU?
Minister.
No, we're not currently. Banking was a project which was being undertaken by my department. We, like every other department, are rightly prioritising. That prioritisation is meaning that I can do some exciting and important things around competitiveness, but it does mean at this stage of this government that we won't be making progress with the open banking piece of work.
Supplementary.
Does the Minister have anything to say about the importance of open banking and whether he thinks it should become a priority in the very near future?
Minister.
Well, I find myself, it's difficult to answer that question because open banking is important and it can bring benefits, but within my department I've chosen to prioritise the competitiveness work, and I needed the existing budget to do that. I suspect, ironically, that some of the work coming out of that competitiveness might say that we should, in due course, make sure we've got flexible regulations to allow open banking. The whole, one of the purposes of the competitiveness work is that we'll have an action plan going into the elections next year. Whilst we're taking action, of course, right now, but we'll also have a more detailed strategic action plan which the next government can pick up and run with. And I would expect, on balance, that open banking may be included in that.
Supplementary? Well, are there any more questions for this Minister? There we are. It's you again, Deborah.
Well, yes, it is. And there's a very obvious follow-up, which is, could the Minister update us on the work underway with the competitiveness work, particularly as it relates to things like Pillar 2 and the work that was being done to make use of those receipts to improve competitiveness? Could he provide an update on that work, please?
Minister.
So maybe if I'll just do a slightly shortened update, really around work stream 3. He's just questioned me about why open banking was deprioritised. I said because it allowed me to use budget to undertake the competitiveness work. He will know work stream 1 is about committing to our international tax strategy, having tax neutrality at its heart. Work stream 2, where we've used local consultants, is about the business and regulatory environment and getting rid of duplication. Work stream 3 is using an international consultancy body. That contract has just been signed. It was a thorough and robust process. It's one of the best consultancy firms on the international stage. That's important because we're an international finance centre and we compete with those centres across the globe. So I can confirm to the Deputy that is McKinsey. They came and helped us with a strategy 10 years ago. That was incredibly successful. It's why we see financial services still the foundation part of our economy, and we hope that this work that they do will ensure that that remains the case for the next 5, 10 and 15 years.
Supplementary?
Yes, so could the Minister clarify for me, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, but is that work connected to the Pillar 2 competitiveness work, which was designed to provide benefits to corporate entities who would be paying the extra tax, or not directly, but designed to use some of those funds to improve competitiveness of the industry? And if that isn't the case, could he update on that work?
Minister.
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. I totally got the wrong end of the stick of his question. The answer I've just given is about the in-year competitiveness work and the in-year budget. The question, as I understand it, the Deputy is now asking about is the allocation of monies to the competitiveness work in 2026 and beyond. One of the areas that we were considering was thinking things around tax rebates, as we see other countries do. At the stage that we started thinking about that, we were expecting other international finance centres to come forward with similar proposals. They have not yet come forward with those proposals, so we're not quite... Bluntly, we're not able to look at them, mirror them and take advantage of the work that others have done. And also, of course, we know there's still a lot of technical detail to be ironed out before there's that understanding around Pillar 2 is certain, and therefore we've got to focus on that before we focus on those other things.
Jen.
Thank you, sir. Can the Minister confirm how the Competitiveness Programme's emerging actions will specifically support Jersey's Sustainable Finance Action Plan and the implementation of green and ESG-aligned financial services?
Minister.
It's too early to be able to do that, so we hope that internationally respected consultancy firm will be considering that. They right now are out across our community and across global introducers with their network asking questions. And this, of course, is part of what those, both locally in Jersey and also internationally, will be talking about. I think there is a good consensus in industry in Jersey that the work that we've done on sustainable finance is proportionate and appropriate, and we'll continue to work on that.
Supplementary?
Yes, sir. Is the Minister envisaging publishing measurable outcomes showing how these competitiveness reforms will translate into sustainable growth and innovation in financial services sector, especially in the ESG-aligned financial services sector?
Minister.
There will certainly be a report published at the end of all of these 4 work streams, and that report, importantly, will be an action plan. Those actions, of course, need to be measurable, otherwise they're not really actions. Yeah.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. The Minister may be aware Denmark is considering legal changes to copyright for faces and voices in the light of AI training. Is the Minister aware of what protections exist under his laws, and is his department evaluating copyright legislation in the light of how it is now being, content is being used to train AI?
Minister.
So thankfully this is an area which I'm not sure if I've delegated or the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development has delegated, or we've both delegated to the Assistant Minister, Deputy Scott, and I have got no doubt that this is well on her radar. Thank you.
Supplementary? Deputy Tadeo.
Thank you, sir. The External Relations Minister will be aware that an arrest warrant has been issued by the United Nations for the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. The charges are that he is allegedly responsible for war crimes of starvation as a method of warfare and for intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population. And it goes on to, does the Minister and does Jersey's government recognise this arrest warrant?
Minister.
So I think the Deputy's asked that question before, and I've been quite clear. The rulings of the International Court of Justice are recognised in the United Kingdom, and by extension they're recognised in Jersey.
Supplementary.
So when we see the Israeli Prime Minister travelling internationally without impunity and without any of the mainstream media drawing attention to the fact that there is an arrest warrant for his to face these alleged war crimes, does the Jersey government seek to raise concerns with its main ally, the UK, asking what relationship the UK might have in terms with other allies such as the United States in raising these issues? Because it seems to me, of course, that the UK could suggest that the US hand Mr. Netanyahu over for arrest to face to answer for his war crimes, alleged war crimes. Is this something which Jersey can have any voice in? And if so, how has the Minister or his colleagues been voicing those concerns?
Minister.
So it's my understanding that in the United States they don't actually recognise the international courts in the way that happens in the United Kingdom and by extension here, and therefore they take a different view. Perhaps it's not what the Deputy would like me to say, but I, as I think the United Kingdom would do, would support the work of the President of the United States to seek a ceasefire, to seek long-term peace in a crisis that we all acknowledge is unacceptable, and the sooner it can be stopped, the better. And if that requires President Trump to be firm, as he said he would be, with the Prime Minister of Israel, then we would support him being firm.
Any further questions for the Minister in the time remaining? Yes.
And would the Minister confirm that, as far as he's concerned, the arrest warrant would be enforceable in Jersey were the individual ever to try and visit Jersey for whatever reason?
Minister.
So that is my understanding of the situation. Of course, that arresting people doesn't fall within my political remit, even though the Deputy might wish it did.
Supplementary. That concludes the questions for that Minister. We now move on to questions about notice to the Chief Minister. And the first question is from Deputy Dubé.
Thank you, sir. Has the Chief Minister noted the UK plans to ban non-disclosure agreements, which are often used to silence women and other minorities who have been victims of sexual harassment and discrimination? And will Jersey follow suit?
Chief Minister.
I have noted them, sir, and no decision has been made as yet as to whether Jersey will follow suit.
Supplementary.
Thank you, sir. Would the Chief Minister commit to collating numbers of NDAs that are used, first of all, in the public sector and circulating that information to members?
Well, so first of all, I would say Jersey doesn't always implement what the UK does. We are masters of our own destiny here. And I want to make that clear. So just something's been been ratified in the UK, so it doesn't automatically apply here. I think we need to discuss it first before we commit to doing any work on it, but I would certainly want to do some in-depth research before considering extending something like that.
Deputy Breniff.
Thank you, sir. The government's common strategic policy says we will introduce a new residential tenancy law. On April 1st, the Chief Minister said, the majority of ministers are in support. I expect the majority of ministers will support it with 1 or 2 exceptions. Is the Chief Minister still confident that the majority of ministers will support the Housing Minister's proposition with just 1 or 2 exceptions? And if not, will he indicate how big a rebellion he is expecting from his own ministers?
Chief Minister.
First of all, so I'm not expecting a rebellion because we're more grown up around this Council of Ministers table. We have processes and procedures for dealing with bona fide disagreements where views are strongly held between ministers, and it's called an agreement to differ, as I have explained to this Assembly before, sir. I think the position has evolved slightly, sir, since my comments on, did you say the 1st of April? Yes, coincidence. But and there is concern. Now, we have agreement to differ on this important proposition, and I understand there are a number of ministers and assistant ministers that are considering not supporting the principles, and that could be somewhere in the region of 8 or 9 ministers and assistant ministers, could be a couple more, could be a couple less, but that's not a rebellion. That's a very grown-up, mature way of how we do our business around the Council of Ministers table, sir, but there will be an agreement to differ, and I expect some ministers not to support the principles.
Supplementary.
Agreement to differ seems to mean that ministers can do whatever they want, as long as they strongly feel something. What does the Chief Minister think it says about his leadership that a significant part of his common strategic policy may fall because he cannot persuade enough of his own ministers to support it?
Chief Minister.
I think what it says is that in the absence of a formal collective responsibility policy in this Assembly and around the government table, I think it says we are an extremely pragmatic Council of Ministers, where we are able to disagree without it being disagreeable. Now, we discussed this in detail around the Council of Ministers table, and it was, I think, very good discussions. I hope all the ministers are nodding, which is a good side. And I think that's, in this small island, in our system of government, in this Assembly, that's the right way about going about things. So I would like to think about my leadership, it expresses some reality and some pragmatism and the ability for us to disagree without being disagreeable and without bringing matters to an unhealthy end. And I hope we have a very constructive and productive debate on this, and the Assembly will make the decision. Thank you.
Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. Does the Chief Minister support the Environment Minister's decision to introduce the catch and release scheme and eventually commercial fishing for tuna?
Well, I support the move to extend the convention. We have discussed it, because without a convention, I think we are perhaps in danger of not having the protections that the convention brings. Personally, I think the Deputy knows my views on marine conservation, so I'm not particularly comfortable with it, but I am somewhat satisfied by the protection the convention will provide. We have to, of course, understand what sort of quotas we'll be looking at. I don't feel as strongly, anything like as strongly about it as I do about the appalling, atrocious Grindelwald that's happening in the Faroe Islands right now, where thousands of dolphins and whales are being slaughtered for no reason at all, sir. Thank you.
Supplementary.
Yes, sir. And I hope the Chief Minister is able to send some follow-up letter, as the last Chief Minister did in that regard of the Faroe Islands, but how closely is the Chief Minister working with the Minister for the Environment to align diplomatic, regulatory and commercial efforts around establishing a tuna fishing industry?
Chief Minister.
Well, that's a matter for the Environment Minister. He's aware of my views and feelings on it, but he has my full support in carrying out his work.
Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. Could the Minister explain why he has not yet held the meeting he promised with the Health Department and the neighbours of the St Peter's Technical Park, and will he commit to doing so?
Chief Minister.
I'm sorry, sir. I mean, the Deputy Moore and myself and Deputy Gorst and Deputy Stevenson are colleagues in this particular area. We've all had conversations with particular the residents, the immediate residents, 2 residents, 1 property. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to recall where we are with that. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that without checking the records. I wasn't aware there was a meeting outstanding, but if there is, I'll discuss it with my deputorial colleagues in the district, and we'll address it as soon as possible, and I would apologise if I've missed something.
Supplementary, Deputy Moore.
Yes, sir. The meeting was offered a long time ago, but with the Minister promising to deal with it now that he is in government, and it was cancelled at very short notice. How does the Chief Minister, now that he is in government, propose to resolve the situation, which the neighbours consider it places the government in breach of the human right to allowing people peaceful enjoyment of their possession?
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I don't agree with the Deputy's analogy of what's happened, but I haven't got time to go into all of it now. I've been working on this before I was Chief Minister as a backbencher, at many meetings with those people. It has been confirmed by the Health Minister that a meeting is scheduled for next week.
Deputy Tadier.
So I don't need to ask my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. As we approach the halfway point in the current CSP cycle, does the Chief Minister plan to produce or publish a mid-term evaluation report, and if not, why not?
Chief Minister.
Yes, sir. We have regular updates at Council of Ministers. We're due one, sir, and once that's been presented to come, I'm happy to publish it.
Supplementary. Any more questions for the Chief Minister? Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. Will the Chief Minister set out what work is underway to address Jersey's falling birth rate, particularly in light of the latest figures which show one of the lowest on record for a long time, and claims that now we've got a birth rate that's amongst the lowest in the world?
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I did refer to that in an earlier question, and that is policy under development. We have not completed a clear policy, and how we address that outside of course, the importance of the affordability, the availability of more affordable family homes, affordability of having children, cost of living pressures, which contribute to young families' decision as to whether they have more children. So, of course, we're not entirely sure why the falling birth rate, which is not unique to Jersey, it's happening all over the world, particularly in the West, sir. We're not exactly sure why that is happening, sir. But I'd like to reassure members it is a high priority, and we'll be working on a policy to go further into addressing that. And I would remind members that is going to be a part of the States Members Workshop that I think is now scheduled for next week.
Supplementary.
Sir, thank you. As part of the preparation for that policy under development, has any research been carried out into trying to work out what some of the drivers are for that? And have we asked islanders for their views and experiences?
I'm not sure we've asked islanders yet, so I can't confirm what research has been carried out, but of course we will have to base our policy formulation on facts and figures and research, so that will be an important part of the process to coming up with the policy that will help to address that challenge.
Deputy Renouf.
So last year the budget froze fuel duty. But with the commitment that it would be reintroduced this year, will the Minister confirm that fuel duty escalator will be reintroduced this year?
We haven't made a decision on that just yet. And I know the Treasury Minister and the Environment Minister and I have a meeting scheduled to discuss, but no decision on that as yet, sir.
Supplementary. Deputy Taddier.
Thanks. So would the Minister confirm, Chief Minister confirm, whether or not Assistant Ministers have an equal voice with Ministers around the Council of Ministers table?
Chief Minister.
Well, so one of the changes we made with the new government is that all Assistant Ministers were invited to attend Council of Ministers, and the majority of them do regularly and participate with an equal voice around the table, sir. Of course, Assistant Ministers don't have a vote. It's only the Ministers that have a vote. But I can say they do always make most valuable and important contributions to the debate, and I think that's helpful when it comes to making decisions.
Supplementary.
Thanks. I'm partly, I think, reassured that they don't have a vote, not because I disrespect any of the Assistant Ministers, but because they don't have a direct mandate from this Assembly to act for COM. But does the Minister believe he struck the right balance in terms of having the right numbers around a COM table, and is it perhaps overly onerous to have so many people potentially attending every meeting?
Chief Minister.
I think meetings can be onerous whether you have 3 people or 20 people. It depends on the subject and how everybody's feeling. I think it's worked well. You'd have to ask other ministers. I think the important thing, and I recall back to my time as an Assistant Minister at Home Affairs, actually, with the former Senator Ian Lamarcor. And this, of course, this is no criticism of the former Senator and Minister. But in the past, I know Assistant Ministers haven't always been kept in the loop or been properly briefed. And I think it's important in their role as Assistant Minister, in support to their Minister and vice versa, that they are properly briefed. And that's the main reason they attend meetings, so they know exactly what's going on.
Any more questions for the Chief Minister? Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Could the Chief Minister tell us to what extent the CSP objective around workforce has been achieved and how this is being measured? And does he see any particular sectors where there are still issues arising?
Chief Minister.
Yes. Sorry, so I'm just looking on the list of the 13 priorities on workforce. I think it was a more general commitment in the plan, not one of the... but what we have done is we stabilised the workforce at approximately 8,000 FTEs now. And we've done that by imposing a recruitment freeze, both on staff and consultants. But of course, it's not a freeze as such. It means that every new consultant or new member of staff has to seek approval and make a proper case for doing that. We also took 1,000 vacancies out of the system this time last year. The increase in FTEs this year has just been 42, but we've lost almost 80 staff in back office functions. The 42 have been on frontline services, mainly in health and education. I think nearly all in health and education. So that does demonstrate we are starting to see a reduction in the centre, so where we hope to.
Supplementary.
Thank you, sir. It was particularly in relation to skilled workforce that I was interested, rather than reductions in numbers. Could the Chief Minister say, has he set any targets for the proportion of roles to be filled by local people, or does he accept that more needs to be done on that front to match islanders to available roles?
Chief Minister.
Well, I don't have the statistics with me on that. I'm looking to the Vice Chair of the State's Employment Board. Of course, we always do whatever we can to ensure we match residents and local residents with the jobs available. But as the Deputy will know, it's also important to bring in the skills we need to. We think we've got the balance right now. We have seen the situation settling down. I'm particularly pleased with the Health Department, with the reduction of agency staff and the increase in more permanent staff there. So the policy is starting to work. It's taken a year, but it's starting to bite now. So.
Completes the questions for the Chief Minister. Nothing under J in the order paper. Under K, the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee will make a statement regarding the committee's report on procurement by the Government of Jersey. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Today I present to members and the Public Accounts Committee's report on procurement by the Government of Jersey. Government spends nearly 445 million annually on goods, services and infrastructure, everything from hospital equipment and IT system to public transport and care services. How that money is spent matters deeply. We listened to suppliers, reviewed government data, and held public hearings with officials and business leaders. At its heart, this review asks a simple question. Is public money being spent wisely, fairly, and in a way that benefits islanders? Procurement in Jersey is built on a strong foundation. The Public Finance Manual and procurement best practice tools set clear principles around transparency, value for money, and strategic alignment. However, what we found at these principles are not always reflected in practice. The result is a report with 30 findings and 19 recommendations. Let me summarize the critical areas where we believe action is required. One message we heard clearly is that the system isn't working as well as it should for small local businesses and charities. The process is often too complex and resource heavy, putting local businesses and charities at disadvantage. Some are simply giving up. That should concern us all and needs to change. There is a real potential for Jersey to deliver more social and economic value, supporting local jobs and encouraging sustainable procurement if the system is made more accessible and consistent. We also believe that more information should be shared with the public. There is currently a social value impact report, but it is not in the most accessible format publicly. Islanders deserve to see how government spending is helping to meet community priorities, whether that's through jobs creation, environmental sustainability, or support for the voluntary sector. The committee recommends the creation of a single point of contact to help charities navigate procurement and commissioning across different departments. We also want to see local economic contributions, such as tax paid and jobs created, properly recognized when the government decides which supplier to choose. More sustainable charity funding. Charities face multiple barriers, fragmented contracts across departments, short-term funding cycles, and the difficulty navigating procurement systems. We are calling for a single point of contact to support charities and engaging with the government and move forward 3-year funding cycles, providing stability and improving service planning. Procurement breaches have been identified as an area of concern for PAC, with 142 recorded in 2024 alone. These breaches are often attributed to poor planning, and there is a lack of clarity around how officials are held accountable when these occur. The PSC calls for stronger enforcement of breach reporting, including investigation for breaches over £25,000, and integration of breach accountability into performance appraisals for accountable officers and officers responsible for procurement activity. These measures aim to foster a culture of responsibility and continue improvement. We also identified major challenges in the government's approach to digital procurement. An overarching IT strategy, which has been promised since 2022, and I do hope will be published shortly, Departments have been managing hundreds of separate projects without a shared roadmap, leading to duplications, insufficiencies, and unclear value for money. Without stronger central coordination and performance tracking, Jersey risks falling behind in delivering effective and secure digital services for islanders. A lesson learned exercise on the joint ferry tender. The recent joint ferry procurement exposed critical flaws in governance, coordination, and decision-making. No shared evaluation process, no shared accountability, and ultimately two different outcomes. We recommend a full review of what went wrong and development of robust joint procurement framework for any future by jurisdictions tenders. These are not abstract recommendations. They are designed to make the system fairer, simpler, and more responsive, so that businesses, charities, officers, and the public can better engage with how the government spends their money. And finally, I thank my fellow committee members, officers, businesses, charities, and members of the public who shared their experiences and evidence. We hope this report helps move on conversation forward and leads to real visible improvements. This report is available on the State Assembly website and it's call for action. We look forward to the government's formal response and, more importantly, visible, measurable progress in the months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Now, understanding orders, there are now up to 15 minutes of questions for the Chair of PAC, and the first question is from Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I thank the Chair for her statement and for the report. I was wondering, at the beginning of her statement, the Chair referred to charities and small organisations and businesses in Jersey wishing for a more simplified or easier to understand procurement process, something which I do agree with. But I imagine a governmental response would be a lot of these complexities are there because the Comptroller and Auditor General has asked for them to be there. I was wondering if the Chair would respond to that and whether she sees that many of the Comptroller and Auditor General's recommendations as being one of the reasons why the government of Jersey has become layered in bureaucracy.
Chair.
Thank you. And actually, it's really, really good question. And as the Minister aware, we are working with Comptroller and Auditor General, and our reviews are based on Comptroller and Auditor General reports. And working with Comptroller and Auditor General, I can assure that it is an option. An option needs to be put in place when you're creating different frameworks, which still can be fair, and you can see that UK is separating between smaller contracts and bigger contracts. They have Procurement Act 2023, where if you put the right frameworks in place, it can be addressed. It's not about Comptroller and Auditor General. Comptroller and Auditor General want to see fair and good governance in place. And what we found, we have good frameworks, but in day-to-day work, it doesn't come in the reality. So,
Supplementary.
Thank you, sir. And with regard to those smaller Jersey organisations, whether they're businesses, charities or other organisations, and forgive me because I haven't read all the report, did the panel find that the Government of Jersey was sufficient in terms of its building in a preference really for local businesses to be the suppliers as opposed to off-island businesses to be the suppliers?
I would like to respond in two parts, if I may. First of all, if members would look at the finding number 3, where we calculated how many contracts, number of purchase order raised. So between 0 to 1,000, it was 105,000 purchase orders. If we are going between 1,000 to 25,000, it's 30,000 orders. And if we are going above 100,000 and 506. So I think if we're thinking about Jersey, and Jersey is small businesses, small, medium businesses economy, most of the purchases coming from the government, if we're talking about the numbers, they're under 25,000. And actually under 25,000, officers even don't need to ask for quotes. They basically need to look at the suppliers on the register and give a telephone call. Where we do have a problem, and this is our, for example, recommendation number 13, that commercial services team should seek regularized meetings with local businesses, representative body and charities to discuss challenges and barriers, to discuss if they have a problem to access to the system, which is a bit complex. And maybe once they've been trained properly, it would be easy to access. There are other options to do. Second thing we do recommend, and it's a recommendation, I'll find in a minute number of the recommendation, but we do recommend to have a separate line in procurement strategy which assess economic contribution of the local businesses. Because when we are, during the public hearings, it was all about the social value, which social value is extremely important, but we would like to see more clarity. And when we ask about the economic contribution of the local businesses, would they receive extra points, basically, because they're paying taxes here, because they're employing people here? We've been told it's coming in one pack. So we have suggested to have extra line. When we've been challenged about international agreement that we could not disqualify Off Island prior online, just a minute, I'll find it in a minute. Basically, there is, UK do have Procurement Act when under certain amount of contracts, some of them 140 plus, some of them 240, 200 something plus, £1,000, they can decide that they're going to the local suppliers. So the precedent does exist, and it's up to Treasury team to work.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you. So could the Chair outline the key findings of their review into how the Government of Jersey is leveraging strategic public procurement as a tool to advance sustainability goals, encourage innovation and maximise social value for the island?
Chair.
Thanks. Sorry. Thank you. Yes, we have questioned during our review connection to the island outcomes and the future Jersey vision. And what we found out that first of all, we found out that some of the strategies had 5% weighting for the social value and some of them had 10%. And I really congratulate the Treasury team because during the review was very long. During the review at the last public hearing, they have confirmed now that every social value will be 10% as a weighting, which is important. And we also suggested that it needs to be very clear KPIs, what we're expecting in the island outcomes and what's actually impressively stated at the strategy and the procurement documents. It was very interesting to go through, we've gone through various procurement strategy. Obviously, they've been provided in confidence to the Public Accounts Committee, and I will not mention, but some of the procurement strategies and submissions were very detailed, was very clear connected to the island outcomes. I can open island outcomes and see how that particular bidder contributing to island outcomes. And some of them, it was miss and match, and some of them had very woolly, washy kind of suggestions about, and this is why we had the recommendations that it will be very clear set up in their submissions.
Supplementary?
Yes, and thank you very much for that answer. And it clearly shows that there hasn't been consistency through the different processes around this using strategic public procurement. Going beyond, I suppose, the recommendations of PAC, I mean, how do you see that is there anything specific in recommendations of PAC to really drill into that decision-making at kind of the specific tender-by-tender process, and will that be reviewed once the PAC recommendations have been put into place, so that consistency is thorough throughout the whole tendering process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And first of all, we'll wait for the government report. But if I, again, read the attention to recommendation number 6, bullet 2 and bullet 3, we ask to clarify timescale for periodic reporting on delivery of social value commitment. If this not undertaken on regular basis, we need that it should seek to mandate quarterly reporting from the department on the delivery of the social value commitments. Another recommendation, make version of annual social value report publicly available to enhance transparency around how social value commitments are being met through the procurement process in the annual report and accounts. So we did make very clear recommendation. Obviously, as a PAC, we would follow, and I assume that will go into our legacy report.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to the Chair and the PAC members for producing an important piece of work. Amongst the findings were that quite a large number of exemptions are being relied on, also that there were a total of 142 procurement breaches in 2024. Unlike its report on complaints, the report doesn't identify the departments who perhaps seem to be particularly reliant on exemptions, or the departments that seem to be responsible for breaches. I just wondered whether the Chair would like to provide a bit of insight on that.
Chair.
Thank you. There are lots of information provided on confidential base, and because the numbers will vary from year to year, it was a conversation with the government. For much important for us, and when we see, because it's going through different departments and different part of the department, so it's something that is not consistent. What's really important that they will start, what we did find strange, that it's not consistent lessons learned, what happened and how it will be changed. And this is why we recommended that the officers who recorded the breach it will be included in the officers' appraisal and performance management by the end of the year.
Supplementary?
Yes, please, sir. So the PAC has recommended that there should be a requirement for any breaches on procurements above the 25,000 threshold to be investigated by the relevant accountable officer. Given that there's been 142 procurement breaches in 2022, why, and given the ethical kind of considerations, why did the PAC suggest that it should only be breaches in excess of that amount that should be investigated?
Chair.
Because the procurement under 25, you don't require the quote. So you have up to 25,000, an officer can choose from the list of the registered approved suppliers. The moment that above 25, up to 100, they must have 3 quotes submitted and to make informal decision who will be awarded the contract. So this is why we believe that the moment that the decision should be made who will receive the contract according to the public finance manual, this should be investigated.
Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. The panel found, I think, that the third sector would prefer more than 1 year financial settlements. Of course, the Chair will know that the only way to be able to do that is for this Assembly to have multi-year budgets. She will recall I proposed a 1 year and 3 year budgets. I wonder if she now would be more susceptible to such a proposal in this Assembly.
Chair.
Thank you. And actually, I was supportive at the first place because I believe that we do need to have stability. And when we had a previous conversation, even in my ministerial, when I worked with the charities, and I worked with the charities that deliver statutory duties, I cannot see how we can ensure that we have the quality of the service, recruitment, because if charity knows that they have a funding for a year, they cannot recruit social worker or carer for 3 years. And this is, for me, apart from other things that happen. So I do support long-term budgeting because it gives security. We always can review, we always can bring new amendments, but we need some vision and strategic vision going forward for the assembly fundings and for the charity.
Supplementary? Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. In fact, Deputy Gorst has asked the very question that I was going to ask, because I am aware that charities have made submissions that it is extremely difficult for them to work on an annual basis. Just to supplement Deputy Gorst's question, I wondered if the chair of PAC would also acknowledge that the process of procurement takes charities very, very many hours, wastes their time, and it could be a much better procurement process. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and this is why it was included, that charities, small and medium business were included in the similar recommendations, because charity needs to deliver charity work and not to go between different departments. When we ask officers from the commercial services, for example, we have a big charity and the charity delivers some services to within the social security, within health, or within education, do they need to agree 3 different contracts? And apparently they do need to agree now 3 different contracts. So does charity really needs to go into negotiate with 3 different officers than to have clear one single point of contact where they can agree to all services that they would be delivering for government and get on with the work instead of continue filling endless forms for the same charity.
Now, the 15 minutes has expired. There is power understanding orders to extend for a further 15 minutes, if that's proposed.
I was going to propose an extension, sir.
Yes. Seconded? Is that any members content to extend 15 minutes? Yes, the period is extended for 15 minutes. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I was wondering if, particularly in that £0 to £25,000 range, but to be honest, across the board, if the Public Accounts Committee had thought about undertaking a quantitative analysis to see whether some firms seem to be getting preferred treatment or not, particularly, as the chair has said, under £25,000, officers can just pick from a list. Well, if officers are picking the same firms from a list, then there would likely be unfair treatment. I was wondering if such an analysis had been undertaken.
Chair.
Thank you. And it was, it is in the report, but we decided not to make specific recommendation on that because for us it was connected to the whole process of the governance. One of the areas that was raised, and I was raised during the public hearing, how the commercial services monitor when you have the same supplier submitting multiple 24999. Do they have anything in the system when the same supplier reached certain level, it will trigger and their contracts will be reviewed. I've been told currently the system are not allowing to trigger and they must do it manually and it's lots of work. So we encourage the commercial services to look into this, but it's something that needs to explore more. I understand when Public Accounts Committee started this, actually when we started to write this report, we gone around 30 recommendations and it's gone down to 19 because I also recognize that it's not the number of recommendations. I would rather to do less recommendation and the committee would rather to do less recommendations, but it's important that will be delivered. But the area that the Minister raised is valid, and we've heard concerns from the Institute of Directors, Chamber of Commerce and Construction Council, and we believe that recommendation to have regular meetings and knowing what work is coming and engagement with the suppliers might open this to different level.
Supplementary.
Thank you, sir. In that same vein, would a recommendation to for departments to list their suppliers, and so then the public could see whether particular companies are being preferred over other companies, and competitors could see whether they're losing out to always the same company. Would not public lists of those sorts of small levels of procurement also be helpful?
I think it's a suggestion that can be discussed with the Treasury Minister, and I can see the Treasury Minister at this suggestion that can be discussed. It's nothing stopping Council of Ministers to work together and introduce this for the more transparency.
Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. And in relation to the recommendation to have a single point of contact for charities, at the moment the setup is that any grant-funded charity has access to a commissioner in the various departments, and that serves a dual purpose of having a commissioner who has deep understanding of that individual department and the wider corporate understanding of government. So does the chair consider that having a single point of contact would weaken that deep understanding?
I believe that there are two areas. One area that you need to sign the contract and fill the documents, and another area where you are working with designated lead and within the department to do actual delivery of the services. So the actual lead in each department can communicate with one point to sign the papers. It's about the paperwork, it's about the complexity of the system, it's about the time that's spent to fill the documents. All other delivery, it's normal delivery. After you sign the contract, you are working with the people that you're working within the department and within the public.
Supplementary.
Thank you, sir. So does the chair see this as the creation of a new role?
I believe that one of the leads of the departments can take a lead, or this is the conversation that needs to be held, and we have several recommendations about the role of the commercial services.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. The chair has mentioned that government supplied information that indicates departments that have a pattern of procurement breaches and a pattern in terms of the use of exemptions, and that the actual identity of departments that perhaps are in breach more or use exemptions more haven't been disclosed as a result of that request. Has the PAC nevertheless got any assurance from government that they will be looking into the pattern insofar as it does perhaps affect some departments more than others?
First of all, thank you for the question again. We will look for the government response because we made very clear recommendations around the breaches. And I believe that the deputy, as the member of executive, can receive this information within the government, and maybe it needs to worry all of us, and the government has an option to act on it and look where the breach is held and how it can be dealt.
Supplementary. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. The chair of PAC mentioned that digital procurement has been not good in many areas. Can she say why she thinks that is, and what does she think about the Green Book approach? Thank you, sir.
Chair.
Thank you. What we found out that, and this was during the public hearing, and that we had 300 plus different projects going around the departments. The prioritization that has been done, it's boiled down to 100 active projects. But what was really big concern of the committee, and we couldn't get a clear answer, that how the prioritization works between the department. What is clear that each department decides what's important for that department, and they prioritize what will be number one, number two, number three. When we question Chief Information Officer and asking, but one of the departments, their number one, may be less critical than number 5 of other department. How you ensure that the prioritization and budget done on overarching corporate risk level? And we didn't get these answers. This is why I'm really looking forward to see, I know the digital strategy is on the way, and I would like to see how the prioritization done on corporate risk level and not silo on departmental level.
Supplementary?
Thank you, sir. Would the chair of PAC also say that it's important in health that the clinicians have a good say in what's going on? Thank you, sir.
I think it's important that the users will have input in any department because they're using this and they need to tell what are the categories and what needs to be included and what the outcome they need to ensure that it works out. But it's always the balance for what for PAC was important. It's really that the decision-making process, what's coming first and what's coming second on the government, overarching government level, needs to be taken and needs to go through the framework and not silos each department separately.
Any more questions for the chair of PAC? In that case, that concludes that period of questions to the chair of the Public Accounts Committee. Before we start public business, there needs to be a decision made about whether to reduce the minimum lodging period in respect of two matters listed on the order paper. First I was going to mention was one that involves the Chief Minister, who's not currently in the Assembly. Perhaps we'll deal with the second one then. That's the request for the Assembly to reduce the minimum lodging period for the proposition Channel Islands Lottery Distribution of Proceeds 2025. Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, do you therefore wish to make the proposition under Standing Order 26.7 that the lodging period be reduced to allow this matter to be debated at this sitting of the Assembly?
Yes, sir, if I can, thank
you. Do you wish to say any more than that?
Happy to. I wasn't sure when would be the appropriate time.
Well, this is the time.
Okay, thank you, sir. So there's been a slight delay in lodging this year's distribution of proceeds proposition to allow for engagement with the Association of Jersey Charities, the Jersey Community Foundation and Jersey Sport, as well as the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, to ensure that all relevant parties were in support of a new formula for distributing the proceeds of the charity. I'm grateful, sir, to the Scrutiny Panel's comments and consideration of this, and hope that members will agree that the new formula will allow for more effective grants to both sporting organisations and to charities supported by the Jersey Community Foundation. So in respect to that, I hope that members will give their support to debating the proposition at this sitting before the summer recess, because to do so will allow for proceeds to be distributed as soon as possible during the summer. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until September, and that would quite simply mean charities not receiving funding during the summer. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded? Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Yes, D'Artagnan.
Thanks, sir. Could we just clarify, could the Minister clarify that it wasn't possible to lodge this any earlier and that it won't be the case that the redistribution of funds is going to be, he's going to ask for this every year, it's just this year was an exception. Could he just clarify again that it was absolutely necessary to do that, and it's in the public interest? I think as a panel we're fairly relaxed that the proceeds do need to be distributed in a timely manner, but simply it's the lodging period which we had that question about, which I think the Minister's partly addressed in his opening, and maybe you can just again clarify those extra points in summing up, sir.
Does anyone else to speak on the proposition? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir, and I thank the chair of the scrutiny panel for his comments and his questions. And yes, I can clarify this is an exception to the norm. This is in no way meant to be the norm, and I would ordinarily prefer to be bringing this proposition much earlier in the year, because the sooner we can get funds to charities, the better it is for those charities and the people and organisations that they support. So this is a one-off, I can assure the Assembly of that, sir.
Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show. The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 41 votes for, 1 vote contra.
Member voting cont, Deputy Barbara Ward. Sorry, sir, I did press poor, but I see it's on cont. So it's an error, sir.
Well, I'm afraid to say the vote has been recorded as it's been recorded. There is also the amendment of the Council of Ministers to the proposition lodged by Deputy Gardner entitled Joined Up Public Infrastructure Framework for an Ageing Population, lodged this on the 4th of July. In order for this matter to be debated, Standing Order 32 needs to be suspended, so the amendment can be listed for debate at this meeting, and the minimum lodging period needs to be reduced so it can be debated also. Chief Minister, do you make that proposition?
Yes, I do, sir. Apologies, I had to step out of the Assembly just then. I think, sir, just because of the way the Council of Ministers meetings fell when we discussed forthcoming business with our budget workshops, meant we were short on time, sir. And I know that the Constable St John, the Infrastructure Minister, and Deputy Luce Environment Minister had discussions with Deputy Gardner and agreed a form of works which was acceptable to the Council of Ministers. We spent 2 or 3 days just finalising the detail, which is why it was lodged late, sir, for which I apologise. I'd be grateful if the Assembly would accept the amendment, although it was lodged late. I understand Deputy Gardner has accepted, is planning to inform the Assembly she would like it accepted. Thank you, sir.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member speak on the proposition?
Yes, I would
Deputy
like
Gardner.
to speak. I said, first of all, thank you for the Council of Ministers engaging with me. We did have only 2 weeks between 2 state sittings, and it did take time to finalise, and I will be accepting the amendment if it's important for members to know when they're making the decision. Thank you.
Does any other member speak on the proposition? I call upon the Chief Minister to reply. Chief Minister.
I thank Deputy Gardner for confirming she's accepting, sir. And may I have the appeal, please?
That has been called. 4 members are invited to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And this time the proposition is adopted unanimously. 43 votes for. Moving on to public business. The first item is the draft Harbours Inshore Safety Jersey Amendment Regulations lodged by the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. The main respondent is the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Harbours Inshore Safety Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 4 of the Harbours Administration Jersey Law 1961 and Article 49 of the Shipping Jersey Law 2002.
The Minister will propose the principles.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased, sir, to be bringing forward this P3, the Draft Harbours Inshore Safety Jersey Amendment Regulations. They follow the adoption of amendments to the Shipping Jersey Law 2002 by this Assembly in March of this year. Amendments to the Harbours Inshore Safety Regulations are proposed to complete this update to Jersey's maritime legislation. I'd also, sir, like to thank the Economic and International Affairs Panel for their comprehensive review of this proposition and subsequent recommendations, which have been warmly welcomed and are being considered. The objective of this proposition, sir, is to make Jersey's territorial waters safer for all who use them, strengthening our maritime legal framework and increasing our accountability, user accountability. The need for change is rooted in case law and was highlighted by a recent maritime incident which demonstrated a gap in our existing laws. This proposition includes new offences for dangerous and careless operation of a vessel, including where serious injury or death has occurred, and aggravated offences for when alcohol or drugs are involved. So this will mean greater accountability for all sea users, establishing clearer duties and legal responsibilities for their actions. Currently, sir, a vessel may be stopped if there is suspicion of reckless operation, but it is the case today that a breath or blood sample, which might prove intoxication, is not mandatory and cannot be compelled. To address this, the proposition includes new powers for the police and harbour master to breathalyse individuals when there's reasonable suspicion of careless operation or serious harm. The threshold for carelessness is low, such as speeding or running a red light, which most people assume red lights are only found on roads, but there are, as boat users will know, red lights and green lights at the entrance to the harbour. The majority of the offences included in this proposition mirror Jersey's Road Traffic Jersey Law 1956, including the associated penalties, ensuring therefore consistency and proportionality across our legal frameworks. There is, however, one deviation from the Road Traffic Law, and that is the introduction of a bespoke, careless operation whilst under the influence offence. This allows for breath testing based on suspicion of careless behaviour, without the evidence or suspicion of injury or fatality. Operating a vessel whilst over a prescribed limit in itself will not result in an offence. There must be a suspicion of carelessness. The aim for that is to avoid penalising those who operate their vessels responsibly. There's no evidence, and this is very important, of a consistent problem in Jersey of people dangerously operating vessels whilst under the influence. So this makes the bespoke offence a proportionate response to the current level of risk. The heightened risk of legal consequence should, and I believe, and I hope the Assembly accepts, deter individuals from engaging in dangerous or irresponsible vessel operation, ultimately leading to safer waters for all. Sir, in my opinion, this is a measured approach. While our waters are not currently unsafe, these amendments will provide much needed clarity on acceptable and unacceptable conduct, helping to prevent incidents before they occur. This proposition represents a crucial step in strengthening our maritime law, ensuring it is fit for purpose in protecting all who enjoy our waters, and ensuring proportionate charges can be levied against those who behave improperly in our waters. And sir, just before I finish, I would just like to make one comment, because in the scrutiny panel's paper, they did ask for me as Minister to provide during the debate draft regulations as to what, before the debate of the draft regulations as to what will be contained within the enforcement policy statement. So I just wanted to say that the enforcement policy, as issued by the Ports of Jersey's Harbour Authority, has been published since November 2024 and outlines its principles and approach to enforcing maritime legislation and maintaining safety within Jersey's harbours and territorial waters. In addition to that, sir, the Harbour Authority, led by the Harbour Master, and the States of Jersey Police are currently drafting and coming towards the end of drafting an MOU that will ensure that responsibilities for policing these regulations, and should they be passed, will be that kind of division of responsibilities. So the enforcement policy is published and has been for a year or so, and the draft MOU between the police and the Harbour Authority, the Harbour Master, is nearing completion. With that, sir, I make the proposition.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member speak on the principles? Deputy Alex Kirstis.
Thank you, sir. And I don't have too much that concerns me in the principles. I'm not trying to throw any last-minute pieces into this shipping legislation or inshore legislation. But the Minister did mention in his opening remarks that the legislation in many ways mirrors our approach to the road traffic law, and highlighted just one context where it differed, which was the charge around drinking only carelessly. But I hope the Minister perhaps could expand a little in his summing up on the principles as to what direction he feels these draft regulations take, not with regards to any of the drinking elements, but with regards to competency and relevant experience on the water.
Sir, may I ask for a point of clarification there, sir?
Yes, point of clarification.
Of course.
But there is a slight element of humour. I believe the Deputy said that the regulations speak about drinking carelessly. I think he meant, I just wondered if he could clarify, did he mean operating a vessel carelessly as opposed to drinking carelessly?
I can happily clarify. What I meant was the new charge or the new offence cause, which would be operating a vehicle carelessly and having a measured sample of drug or alcohol. I hope that clarifies my shortage of good words today. No, I really want to highlight this because the difference compared to the road traffic law and to how we work on the roads is that most vehicles on the road require a licence to use it, However, the current, and I raise this in the principles, I hope future position for our waters is that we do not licence or have mandatory qualifications for mariners or personal yachtsmen and yachtswomen. The EIA panel have highlighted submissions from organisations such as the St Helier Yacht Club, of which I am a member, highlighting that they would not support proposals that make qualifications mandatory. And so this is something I would like the Minister to kind of weigh up a little more in the summing up, whether he feels that the articles in the law shift the principle of qualifications and relevant experience in a way that we haven't seen. I would say that I, like organisations like the St Helier Yacht Club and others, I recognise the value in gaining qualifications. I think we need to be, it would be helpful to be reassured that for those operating a range of crafts, from paddle boards all the way up to sailing boats and small motorboats, that knowledge and very valuable real-world experience is passed often from seafarer to seafarer, and not necessarily in courses, although those are also used for brushing up on the technicals. And I say this particularly in the context of Article 9.1, which is the offence that has a that judges competency, and 9K, which introduces a principle of relevant experience in water activities such as water skiing. If you could also perhaps touch on whether this topic was explicitly discussed during the law drafting phase, whether any feedback came out of that, that'd be helpful. And I only raise this, of course, because I think it's an area that if the Minister could provide his intent and perhaps some reassurance to those who understand the law in one way, and I know that the yachts organisations take this not to mean that qualifications are expected, that would help reassure people. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Constable St Brelard.
Thank you, sir. I must first of all declare a conflict, not because I drink, but because I've been involved with the marine leisure industry for more years than I can care to remember. So my experience is that if drinking takes place before people put to sea, the sea turns out to be a great leveller, and they certainly regret their actions soon after the boat begins to roll. What happens after the voyage is another matter. But I think one of the points made by the scrutiny panel, and I was grateful to listen to their interview with the Minister and his officers and the Home Affairs Minister, was over the methodology in which testing might take place. And in truth, sir, it can only be reactive. I don't think it can be proactive. People are setting off to sea in all different directions, whether it be surfboards, whether it be kayaks, bigger or smaller boats, and I think it would be quite impractical to police that in any confident sort of way. With regard to competence at sea, so I think we need to be aware that certainly on our adjacent French coast, French nationals are obliged to have what in practice is Helmsman's Certificate of Competence, and in fact any Jersey yachtsman wishing to go to France ought to have one of those, and for most part I think they will, sir. I think it's difficult to compare what's going on at sea with what might go on the road, and when we come to testing and limits, the timing is of course a consequence. On the road it's almost easier in that a drunken driver might be picked up by the police on the side of the road, breath tested and further tested at the police station, whereas in a seagoing experience they will might be tested after an incident, but that may not be for several hours later. And I know there are methodologies with regard to countbacks, but it does strike me so that it's not going to be a practical proposition. In regard to drugs testing, so the committee in its comment did refer to the use of medicinal cannabis, certainly in road use, and where the effect is pretty well unknown, but we have received comments from medical professionals that they are concerned about the level of medicinal cannabis use, and I think that should apply in the same way to this proposed law, sir. With regard to unreasonable fumes, I think there's a good point. I don't think it's necessarily a common occurrence with small vessels unless there's a particular fault with an engine, but that is soon fixed. It might be a stuck turbocharger which has the effect of belching out black smoke. But I would say so the principal culprits with regard to fumes tend to be the larger ships, and one can only see our rather aged DFDS ferries running out of Centellia belching significant fumes at the moment. So that's, I'm sure, another matter for the Minister to consider in another sphere. So, truthfully, sir, I think this as sort of supplying the Harbour Master with a trigger to enact these regulations is the right way forward, and I am pleased to support it and feel that it will improve safety at sea for all those concerned and all those who use it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Altar. Does any other member speak on the principles? Yes, Terry Tudio.
Thank you, sir. So, as has been mentioned, the scrutiny panel has looked at this piece of legislation, the amendments that are coming forward to it, quite comprehensively. However, sir, we still have some concerns, which I'll get round to in my comments, sir. I think the first point to make is that we broadly welcome what's being performed here. We know that it comes as part of a package of P4 that was passed earlier in the year, which really set about some definitions of vessels and saying what is constituted as a ship. So there's been some change in terms of the names. I think the first thing to remind ourselves of here is that the current legislation is drafted, or the proposed legislation is drafted quite broadly in the sense that a ship can mean anything from a large motor vessel, sailboat, but it can also mean a jet ski, paddleboard, kayak, surfboard. I think the list goes on. So there are all sorts of sea users that are captured in this potentially, and so it's not just about big boats, although in some of that's perhaps what we're immediately thinking of, especially when it comes to the risks associated with the sea and inshore safety. So I do need to declare an interest myself, and I think it's important that members consider declaring an interest, but I think it's widely shared. So I am both a boat owner and a member of St Helier Yacht Club and also the Bonwy Boat Owners Association. But I hope that I'm independently minded in that as well, sir, and I haven't had any consultation directly, and none of those groups speak for me necessarily in terms of these what's being proposed here, sir. I think where it becomes a bit more complicated is that I think the principles are in a way quite tightly linked to what is being proposed in the articles. So I think we get the point that a lot of this is about definitions. It's about giving more powers to the Harbour Master and other delegated Harbour Masters. But it's also based on, as we've heard from a couple of incidents that have happened, very serious, but could have been even more serious incidents where there was seen to be perhaps an absence of legislation or an absence of policing power to deal with those. Well, I think what it fundamentally comes down to for me is that in passing this law, and in particular when we get to the articles, the first thing to remind ourselves of is that we're introducing new criminal offences here, so it's not something that we should do lightly. It's also introducing some aggravated offences, which of course mean that I think I'm right in saying that the prison sentences for those, or the penalties for those, are doubled as to what they might be if they weren't aggravated. So it is quite serious when we're talking about criminality and potentially taking people's liberties away from them. And I think that's really important that we know exactly what the government's philosophy and direction of travel is when they're proposing this legislation. And something that I've had trouble getting my head around, and I think the panel also has struggled to actually getting to the bottom of, is what the government's message is going to be on alcohol and sailing, alcohol and operating a ship. Because we're told on the one hand that at the moment, as things currently stand, the Harbour Master, the police if you like, don't have the ability to test people, to breathalyse sailors to see if they've been drinking. And of course the answer comes back, well of course you can't breathalyse them because there's not an offence. You can be literally 3 sheets to the wind and get behind the sails or the wheel of a vessel, whether that's a motorboat or a large yacht. It doesn't matter if you've had 1 bottle of wine, 2 bottles of wine, a 4-pack of high strong beer or whatever, and you could be over the limit for what you would be to get into a car, and it's currently legal, and it will still be legal under this proposed legislation. So the question has to arise, testing for what? What is it that the Minister wants to give the Harbour Master power to test for if what he's testing for is not a de facto primary offence in itself? And then the answer comes back, well, it's because we want to introduce a new offence of an aggravated offence, which is careless operation of a ship or dangerous operation of a ship with consumption of alcohol, where you would be over the limit to get into a car. But then we get into this loop of saying, well, actually, but it's not an offence, is it, to get into a boat and sail the boat when you're over the limit? No, it's not. You have to have been suspected of dangerous or careless sailing, careless operation of that ship, before then they can also, the police can say, we think you've been drinking, therefore we also want to breathalyse you. But the bottom line is that it's possible to sail carelessly without having consumed any alcohol, and presumably, under the law, it's also possible to consume lots of alcohol and not to sail dangerously or not to sail carelessly, because the two are not linked. It only becomes an aggravated offence. And I don't know if other members can perhaps sense where I'm going with this, is that it seems to be slightly confusing, especially when, on the one hand, we're told during scrutiny sessions that we shouldn't be comparing the sea to the road, which I fully get. The road and the seas are different. The roads are much more congested, many more car drivers. Of course, you have to have a licence to be on the road. You have to have insurance. You don't need to have a licence to be on the sea, and that covers lots of different vessels, as I said at the beginning. But the department seems to have chosen exactly the same limits for alcohol testing as they would apply on land, and that's not been quite clear to us why that would be the case either. If there is a higher degree or lesser degree of risk at sea, you could argue that maybe you should be able to have twice as much alcohol before you get into a boat. But the point is, there is no limit to get into a boat and sail it, because you can drink as much as you want under what the Minister is currently proposing. So I think there is a concern about where this philosophy and where the political direction and behind this legislation, even in the principle stage, is coming from. And that's before we get into the question of drug testing. Now, I know the constables have raised some concerns directly with the Minister about drugs, because they can be just as influential, if not more, and somebody getting into a vessel and steering that whilst they're under the influence, and exactly how that will be policed in reality, because clearly there aren't necessarily the same automatic tests that you would have for alcohol. So I think that is one area that, if we were to look at this in any more detail, which I think at the moment, I think we are minded to consider calling this in, but we'd be happy to hear from other members about whether they have concerns or whether actually they're quite happy with all of the regulations as they've been drafted. We would welcome hearing back from them. The Minister talked about two things. I think the first was the MOU, which is still yet to be drafted between the police and the Harbour Office. We received a late submission, I suppose we can call it. It wasn't a formal submission, but we had a meeting, certainly the Vice Chair and myself, which we then shared with the wider panel about an individual who's got extensive experience, both from a maritime background, but also from an enforcement background, who gave us a scenario, which is whereby somebody comes off, let's say, one of the beaches with their jet ski, and they've been seen to be performing carelessly, driving carelessly on their jet ski, possibly dangerously, but they've already come onto the beach and they're about to hitch their jet ski to the trailer and take it back home. At which point, who is it then that has to enforce the law? Is it the Harbour Master, who has jurisdiction over the seas, or is it the police? Does the Harbour Master then have to call the police to come and enforce that? And does he have to say to that person, by the way, I think I need to arrest you, but I can't do it because you're on land now, so do you mind holding on whilst I get my colleague in the police force to come and charge you, at which point the individual may be long gone. may have been drinking, may not have been drinking, of course. So I think it's really important for us, before we pass the articles in the second reading, that we know exactly what that MOU looks like. I also just refer to the financial and manpower statement that is in the draft legislation. I'll just bring that up, because it's this point really at which the talk of a new enforcement policy comes up. So it was our understanding, and it's what's been written there, it says that the resource implication will be underpinned by a new enforcement policy statement which will clarify how Ports of Jersey Limited will discharge its enforcement responsibilities. It goes on to say that as of November 2024, this policy statement is pending approval. So there's some uncertainty from our point of view whether the pre-existing policy enforcement statement which was on the website is going to be superseded or updated at some point, and I think it would be helpful for us and the Assembly to be made aware of that, sir. So the Minister and I have had many discussions about this, so I think a lot of it's not coming as a surprise. I'd welcome any responses from himself or from members, particularly around where they feel the balance of harms sits. I will simply say again that I don't think any of the answers that we've received about the stance on alcohol have fully satisfied us, because I am sympathetic, I think, to where I think both the department and the Harbour Master's office want to get to. I think that they want to put a clear message out to say that you shouldn't drink and drive, if I can call it that. You shouldn't drink and drive a boat. But that there is a pre-existing culture, perhaps, where there hasn't been any restrictions on alcohol consumption and sailing. I wouldn't go as far as to say the two go hand in hand, but perhaps there definitely isn't the same culture that has evolved when it comes to the expectations from the public in terms of road safety. So I think we're in a position now where when it comes to road safety, it's not just illegal and of course easily enforceable that if you drink and drive you are quite likely to get caught, but it's actually socially unacceptable, I think, nowadays for anybody to get into a car when they've been drinking, arguably at all, but certainly significantly, to the point where they would probably be told by their friends and family, I don't think you should be doing that, and indeed they may even get reported by a concerned friend for their safety and for others. And I don't think we're at that point when it comes to sea safety. So I understand that part of this may be an attempt for a softly approach so that enforcement can be put in. But what I fundamentally, again, find problematic here is that we're introducing a new aggravated offence at a time when there isn't even a primary offence. And I think what happened when it came to road safety was very much the fact that you would have had drink driving became an offence. I think it used to be historically quite a high bar. You'd have to drink quite a lot in order to be considered drunk in charge. And gradually over time, as we became more responsible and more aware of the effects of alcohol, we said that limit's got to come right down. And then later on, there was an aggravated offence introduced for careless driving or dangerous driving, which included alcohol. But it really was, one came first and then the aggravated offence came second, I believe I'm correct in saying, but I'll stand to be corrected, but that seems the logical way that things work. When we don't have a primary offence of drink sailing, if I can call it that, what do you do with a drunken sailor, is the question that the scrutiny panel was really trying to get to the bottom of. What do you do with a drunken sailor? You don't do anything with a drunken sailor unless he's committing an aggravated offence of careless sailing or dangerous sailing, and then you can get him and breathalyse him on that pretext. And this is the other point, is that if it is alcohol that we're concerned about and the Harbour Master wants to find a way to breathalyse people, then surely the Minister just needs to decide what is a safe level to sail at, and if that level is either 0 or a certain amount of milligrams in the blood or in the breath, then that's what it should be. But we haven't been able to get that position out of the Minister, sir. So look, I do make those comments. I accept that this has been a journey that the Minister's taken us on. There's a lot here in the principles that are commendable, but the scrutiny panel, I think, still has concerns about how this will be policed in reality. The last point I would make, talking about whether this is proactive or reactive, the reason I've maybe come to the conclusion that it could be a bit more proactive, and that the Constable of St Brelard says he thinks it has to be reactive. Ultimately, this comes down to the messaging that we want to send out. So there are two separate things. Something can be difficult to police, of course, but that doesn't mean that we can't fix ourselves on what the underlying political philosophy should be. So I give a very clear example. We tell our children from a young age that littering is wrong, that you shouldn't litter. It's also against the law to litter. It's just never enforced. Does that mean that we should make littering, take it away from being an offence? No, I think it just means that it's there if we need to, and it's up to us to decide how vigorously we want to police these things. And of course, the Minister has also said that he doesn't want to overly police people who might have had a couple of drinks, then go out on a surfboard, on a kayak, where the possibility for harm to others is much reduced. But again, we would, as a panel, bring that back to the point to say that actually it's the way that the law has been drafted to not be able to distinguish sufficiently between a motorboat, a large sailboat, which can do lots of harm, and smaller vessels, which perhaps it's the individual is most at risk. So I make those comments, and I'll be pleased to listen to any members, whether they think that actually we've completely misidentified the issues here and that nothing is wrong, or if they actually share some of the concerns that myself and the panel have identified.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I also welcome the package of measures, but I do want to pick up on Deputy Tadia's point around alcohol and drugs, because it does seem to me that the key decision here was not to make being drunk in charge of boat an offence in itself. It only becomes an offence if there's an accident. And the Minister has described this as proportionate. And as I read it, that's essentially because the approach is that there isn't evidence of accidents in Jersey waters having been caused by alcohol or drugs, so it would be disproportionate to legislate further. I think this is a finely balanced issue, I think, and I don't want to be alarmist, but it does raise a few worries with me, because one way of interpreting that is we're going to wait until something bad happens before we act, because I think we can be very sure that if something bad does happen that's alcohol and drug related, somebody will be coming back to this assembly to propose tightening of these rules. So we are going to essentially wait and use the past as a guide to the future. And that may be the best way forward. That may indeed be the best way. Sorry.
Point of clarification.
Yield for a point of clarification.
Ready to yield?
You're going to ask me a point.
I was wondering if you could clarify in his speech that actually, if there was a bad accident caused by someone in charge of a vessel with drink and drugs, that this law would prosecute them and is quite capable of prosecuting them. But I asked for clarification because in his speech it didn't sound like he thought it did.
No, I do accept that, and further on in my speech I shall explain why I think that we would be wanting to tighten those rules were an accident to happen, despite the fact that it would be prosecutable. So there is a lot of vulnerability in the water, and I suppose if I have an interest in this, it's as somebody who swims in the sea and bobs up and down, sometimes in quite close proximity to boats. Bays that used to be pretty empty are now often frequented by boats, and there's often quite a lot of enjoyment going on, and that's great. It's impossible to tell from where you are on the water whether that involves alcohol and what the state of the people is. But you are very aware of your vulnerability swimming around boats. And I think that the risk here is that we're denying people who are in possession of information about, let's say, somebody being intoxicated, however they are intoxicated, from being able to do much about it, because no offence is created simply by being intoxicated and in charge of a boat. So you might know that somebody is getting into a boat under the influence, but you could report it. But the response would be, well, at the moment, there's nothing we can do about that. And that just seems a little bit risky to me. We can all find examples, although there may not have been accidents in Jersey waters that can be attributed to alcohol and drugs. I don't think it would take very long on Google to find examples where this has happened in other waters. And of course, there may be specific circumstances there that don't apply here. But we are essentially saying that we have to wait until an accident before we decide there is an offence. And I think the reason to come to the Minister's intervention, the reason why I think this is relevant is that the point about having a law about simply being intoxicated is the deterrent effect that it brings. So at the moment, your basic attitude, were you to be an irresponsible person in a boat, would be, so long as I don't cause an accident, I can get away with this. So I'm probably pretty well in the clear. Whereas if you have an offence that is simply not to be intoxicated and therefore your judgment impaired, because that is what intoxication means, your judgment is impaired, then that is a deterrent. That is a significant question mark you have to raise in your own mind about whether you really should be partaking of alcohol or drugs. And that, I think, is important. And it's particularly true, I think, because one of the effects of alcohol, so I'm told, is to increase overconfidence. And so to make judgment impaired in that way as well, to convince yourself that actually everything will be fine. And that is, of course, where the risks get greater. And I know that in other jurisdictions, for example, Australia, they have a much tougher drink and drug policy for boat owners. In fact, it does effectively mirror that for drinking and driving. Again, I'm sure cases could be made for why that is unique to that jurisdiction. But as I say, I don't want to make a huge point about this, but I do think that the concerns Deputy Tadeo raises are legitimate. And I think his point about social pressure and so on, I would call a cultural issue, cultural shift. That says that what I would like to see really is a cultural shift which says it is unacceptable to be intoxicated in charge of a vessel because your judgment is impaired. And I don't think that we will drive that cultural shift very hard with the changes that we currently are proposing. I think changes that created an offence of drinking or being intoxicated whilst in charge of a vehicle would drive that cultural shift. They would send a clear signal about what is acceptable behaviour and what is not acceptable behaviour. And I think that might change expectations significantly around drinking and sailing. And that, I think, is just worthy of a little more. I appreciate the Minister will have given this a lot of thought, and there will have been consultation. I haven't been a party to that, and I haven't been a party to the scrutiny panel's deliberations. So I raise this as having read the proposition and the associated documentation, and I just raise it as a series of issues that members might want to consider, not to vote against this, but certainly to consider whether it does need closer examination around the article.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Members will know that I have been chair of the St Brelade's Bay Association. They may not know that the association, as well as looking at planning matters, also has met with the Harbour Master in the past regarding concerns regarding the policing of leisure craft in St Brelade's Bay. And what I think this is indicative of is a real difficulty when it comes to regulating the use of an area for pleasure by different types of users, because there are those in our community who would ban jet skis from the area altogether. There are those, I remember having a conversation with the Harbour Master when we're comparing the sea to the roads, And he was talking about there being a lot more space in the sea. And I also said, yes, but you don't find people just lying on the road either, do you? There's all manner of nuances that we have to deal with. And in fact, I have found similar, just inquiring into the possibility of changing rules about dogs and beaches. There are so many different people, different interests, with a view on how beaches should be enjoyed, how things should be enjoyed, that need to be taken account of. And in addition to this, there's this idea of culture change. There's this idea that as a States Assembly, we have to be aware that when we start bringing in changes, that we need to do so in a way that somewhat paces the community. I totally sympathise with those who say we should regulate before something bad happens. I get that in my constituency about speed limits, you know, like we should reduce the speed limit on this road. Well, the road officers say there's never been an accident. I will have constituents saying, well, why are you waiting for one? We have this difficulty when it comes to regulation. And I think there's a lot more that one might consider. When we were looking at water safety, people were talking about the days when surfboards, they had to be insured. That's not required anymore. Why have we done this? Why do we not have beach wardens? Why do we not have people doing so? When it comes to the whole area of policing of these leisure areas, I think there are a lot more alternatives that one might be looking at in order to just say, well, you know, what is the best way forward? Should we even have speedboats? I mean, we had a horrific accident happen in St Bernard's Bay, and it involved a boat that was described as driving erratically, trying to make things fun. You might actually say, well, maybe you shouldn't have that sort of pleasure craft unless they're actually licensed operators altogether, and you shouldn't have jet skis unless they're actually for the Coast Guards. There's so much that we should be thinking of in terms of the policing of this area, and then generally in terms of the use of water. So we come back to this whole idea about culture change, and it's something that I've also found in my assistant minister role when it comes to cybersecurity. In an ideal world, we'd be saying, crikey, put in the best measures possible, and or else, you know, you get fined, and then we can have a really super secure island. But would we be taking the community with us? And I would say no. So we've actually had to have a more, how can I say, a more stealthy approach, a more gradual approach in terms of just making certain consequences, getting people more informed, educating them more, to and just raising awareness. And I believe that's what these regulations do. They're raising awareness. I mean, they are changing things so that you're moving from careless operation of a ship and getting a standard fine to careless operation of a ship when under influence of drink or drugs, and then boom, you've got 2 years imprisonment potentially. So I would actually say if somebody's going on the water and they look like they've had you know, a bit to drink, it's actually, oh, hold on, bud. Maybe you shouldn't do that because the consequences are so much more serious now. So I think that the regulations that we have are proportionate and therefore should be supported. And mainly, let's just get them on the statute book now. If there's more work to do, let it be done in time. But let's please not delay these regulations when they actually could be making a difference to this area of our community. I will just follow up on one thing, and I do support the scrutiny panel in saying that it would be helpful for more understanding of what is meant by excessive fumes. That the GFDS boat, there has been comments on the black smoke, and but it's relatively offshore. But we need, you know, we just need to have a bit more of an understanding, just so that I can perhaps respond to those people commenting to me about it to me right now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the principles of the regulations? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I thank everyone for taking part in the discussion, sir. Sir, to me, you know, there is an element of freedom involved in this, sir, and so I do get concerned when people do talk about effectively curtailing people's freedom, and I think whenever we bring in laws, effectively we are doing that. I was very aware when it was first proposed to me, because I have to admit I didn't go into the elections with changing the shipping laws and the harbour laws as part of my manifesto, sir. So when this was proposed to me by officers and they showed me where there were kind of deficiencies in existing maritime law, it is true that I was concerned about how far do you go in wanting to curtail people's freedoms? And part of that was, and I think Deputy Scott said it incredibly eloquently, because there are so many different communities of users who have different and historic ways of using the sea. And in my mind, the sea is, and in many people's minds, especially when you live on such a small island, the sea speaks to freedom. And so I found this quote by a French writer, Alain Gerbaud, who said, "I wanted freedom, open air and adventure. I found it on the sea." And I think that is how many sea users feel about the sea, that they do see it as a place of freedom, particularly when we're constrained on 9 by 5 miles. That, though, sir, doesn't mean you should abuse that freedom. And it is true that as we stand here today, there is no ability to compel any maritime user, no matter how much you may suspect that they have drunk, to undertake a breath test. They have the right to turn to the harbour master and say no, and walk, or even kind of waddle away, because they're under the influence. There is no ability to compel that breath test. And so, sir, I did want to change that. When it came to the idea of should we say it is illegal to be in charge of a boat, I did stop and say, I think that might be taking a step too far in the way of removing people's freedoms. One reason is, if I were to get in my car today under the influence of alcohol and just sit in the passenger seat, particularly if I had the keys in my pocket, I believe I am committing an offence. Many people do go onto their boats and sleep the night on their boats after having had a dinner and a drink. I don't believe that should be an offence. I do think that there are absolutely practical truths about the sea. The sea is much less densely populated than the roads. Roads are a few metres wide. Users are travelling in both directions very close to each other all the time. They have bikes, they have pedestrians on those roads, all within centimetres at times, especially when Midvale Road was a two-way road. Literally, I would walk down there when I used to live at the top of Midvale Road, and cars would be within centimetres, their wing mirrors, of clipping me at all times. Now, obviously, a drunken driver in that sort of situation becomes very, very dangerous. The seas are much wider, much less dense. The sea is also international. We have people coming here from different places. We haven't been able to know. You cannot know if someone who's leaving the UK to come to Jersey has been drinking en route here. The only way you would know is if they're operating carelessly, that vessel, when they enter Jersey's waters. And under these regulations and these proposals, the harbour master would now have an ability to say, you're operating that carelessly. I think that may be due to alcohol. I would like to compel a breath test. Those are things that cannot be done today. And I think it is much more important, sir, as Deputy Scott said, that we get these offences onto the books as they are. If we then wish, and if the next Economic Development Minister wishes, or is asked by the Assembly to bring forward further regulations that say, stop, we want to make being on a boat under the influence of alcohol, in charge of a boat under the influence of alcohol, an offence, then I would say that's absolutely fine. Bring that forward for debate then. But I do think when you're making a change to a community, you need to bring them with you. And I also believe not just in the freedom of the sea, but in the freedom of Jersey, and Jersey not having a government that is onerous and on people's backs. It is difficult to police the sea. That's a reality. We don't have a standard police force out there on the sea day after day after day, checking people's speeds, checking people's levels of alcohol, anything like this. We don't have that sort of maritime police force. That's not something we have. I don't think any jurisdiction really has that. So actually, the whole drunk in charge offence would be incredibly difficult to enforce. Deputy Tadje did ask me, so what is the government's message on alcohol with this proposition? The government's message is really simple. Be responsible. That, I think, is what the government should be asking of people across the board, wherever it can. Rather than just criminalising people, make them stop and think and ask them to take responsibility for themselves and be responsible themselves. If they are responsible, they won't drink to the point of intoxication and operate a boat. But if they do that, then they stand a very good chance of being convicted of an offence under these rules. There is a cultural issue. People do have a drink on a boat. That's the truth. I don't think the States would be covering itself in glory with any part of the maritime community if they were to suddenly criminalise that. I think that, from the maritime community's perspective, would have come out of nowhere. I think as well, I would as well that you would then have people on paddle boards who would be convicted of such an offence and so on, people on surfboards convicted of such an offence. I think it would be very difficult. And on top of that, we have no evidence of the problem. And whilst I agree, you don't want to wait for evidence of the problem, I agree with Deputy Renniff when he said that, at the same time, you should always bring in laws that are proportionate. One of the problems with Jersey today is that we have become disproportionate in the level of our laws, and we are therefore in many areas making it difficult to operate in this island. But when it comes to evidence here, we don't have evidence of a problem. But we do know that we want, where someone is in charge of a boat and is dangerously in charge of a boat because they are intoxicated, we can now actually take action if we pass this law. If we don't pass this law, we will continue to be unable to take any action. So and I do hope that the scrutiny panel, although it is their right, I do hope they don't call this in, because they will then just be delaying having any ability to even breathalyse sailors or maritime users, because it's not just boats, as somebody mentioned. We will be delaying that for longer and longer. In fact, you'll be delaying it to after the summer. When do most people go on the water? They go on the water in the summer. So again, I would fall back on, if you do think, as a States member, that this law doesn't go far enough, that should not stop you, in my view, passing this law and these regulations. It would just be then incumbent on you to come back, probably in the next term, and say, we would like to have this law extended further. But that shouldn't stop you passing this law. I do think I've taken the right approach in taking a measured approach that enables the maritime community to come with us and to understand that we're asking them to act responsibly whenever they are on the water. And I just think that's a really important, and I believe, a much cleverer way of going about law. I mean, I do think, there is one, and I'm sorry, Deputy Renniff, I have to say it. There is one example of a place where a minister did not take the community affected with him, and that was the tree protection law. And what happened with the tree protection law? The entire law got wiped out as a result of the minister not taking the community with him. What we then see, as we've just seen, is areas of the island being completely denuded of woodland because we now have no tree protection law whatsoever. I don't want to end up in that place. I'd much prefer us to take a step that allows the community that's affected to come with us on this journey. If the States, I personally don't think at the moment we need to go that step further. But if the States Assembly did in the future think that we need to go further, then they can very easily bring in law and ask the next minister to bring in a law that makes being drunk in charge of a vessel an offence. I believe we've gone to the right level on this law, and I ask the Assembly to please do back this proposition and to back the regulations that follow it. And I do ask the scrutiny panel not to call it in, because they will just be delaying this to after the summer, and that will be 1 year without this law on the books against them.
Do you seek a point of clarification?
I do so, if the Minister will give way.
Of course, I didn't see.
I only put my light on. Thank you. I wanted to wait till the Minister concluded his remarks. Can the Minister clarify, because I think he might have misled the Assembly, or certainly the way I interpreted it. He said if people are drunk in charge of a boat, we will be able to take action. Can he clarify that isn't true, and that if somebody's drunk and in charge of a boat, the harbour master, the police, won't be able to do anything about it because that's not an offence?
I don't believe that is what I said. I believe that I said if they're drunk in charge of a boat and operating it dangerously. I believe that's what I said. So I agree that this law, I made it quite clear in my statement elsewhere, this law doesn't make being drunk in charge of a boat an offence. I know it doesn't. It makes operating it carelessly an offence, and I believe that's the right step forward.
Is the appel called for in relation to the principles? The appel is being called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the principles have been adopted. 44 votes for, no votes contra, and 2 abstentions.
The abstentions.
Yes, the abstentions.
Those members who abstained, Deputies Taddier and Wilson.
Deputy Taddier, does the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
Yes, sir.
You do. We need to set a date at which the second reading will take place, no more than 4 meetings' time.
So I believe there's a sitting on the 21st of October. That's not the 4th, it's the 3rd sitting, I think, by my calculations, and that's the one we would aim for.
Yes. So to resume on the 21st of October. Before we move on to the draft residential tenancy amendment law, which is the next matter on the order paper, members may have received an email containing my ruling on what constitutes the principles of a draft law or draft regulations, but some members may not have done so, so I now propose to read that ruling out. I've been asked to provide a ruling on what constitutes the principles of a draft law or draft regulations and what a vote on the principles of draft legislation means. There is no definition in standing orders of what constitutes the principles of draft legislation. However, a number of standing orders govern the progress of draft legislation as it is considered and debated by the Assembly. Standing Order 71 in particular governs the debate on the principles during the second reading of a draft law and draft regulations. Paragraph 4 of Standing Order 71 states that in the debate on the principles, the presiding officer shall not allow any discussion of the detail of any provisions of the draft, although a member of the States may refer in his or her speech to provisions of the draft in order to explain why he or she supports or opposes the principles of the draft. Furthermore, paragraph 5 states that an amendment to the draft may not be proposed during the debate, and paragraph 6 provides that if the states do not agree to the principles of the draft shall be taken to have been withdrawn. From these provisions of Standing Order 71, it can be surmised what the principles are not. They are not in themselves the detail of the draft legislation, and a vote on the principles of draft legislation does not therefore tie the Assembly or any individual member to a decision on any particular detail contained in the individual articles or regulations. Adoption of the principles does not equate to adoption of the draft legislation, as further stages of the debate need to be completed if the principles are adopted. In essence, the adoption of the principles simply allows for the Assembly to confirm that it wishes to continue consideration of the draft law or draft regulations before it, and to debate the details of that draft legislation, including any amendments to those details that are being proposed. The principles can perhaps be seen as the high-level purpose of the draft legislation in question, or the rationale underpinning the legislation. This can potentially be gleaned from different sources, including the short title of the legislation, the long title, and the rationale provided by the proposer in either the accompanying report or their speeches. However, whilst these sources might help members understand the legislation before them, none of them explicitly equate to the principles of that legislation. It is ultimately a matter of personal political judgment for members as to whether they vote for or against the principles of a draft law or draft regulations. It is therefore for each member individually to determine what they take into account when making that decision. What will be a matter of principle informing the vote of one member may not be a matter of principle for the next member. My ruling is that, therefore, is consequently no strict definition of what constitutes the principles of a draft law or draft regulation. The vote on the principles is a matter of personal choice for each member. A vote on the principles is a decision on whether the Assembly's consideration of the draft legislation should continue and whether the detail of that legislation should be debated. With those remarks in mind, we now move to the draft residential tenancy Jersey Amendment Law lodged by the Minister for Housing. The main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Residential Tenancy Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Residential Tenancy Jersey Law 2011, including to improve tenants' rights under residential tenancies. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Before I invite the Minister to propose the principles, it is customary in relation to this matter to consider Standing Order 106 and direct declarations of interest. I remind members that under Standing Order 106, a member of the States must declare an interest at the earliest opportunity, stating the nature of the interest if they have an interest in a proposition. And hitherto the position has been that landlords and indeed tenants have declared such an interest. But I should go on to clarify that although that will amount to an interest for the purpose of a declaration under Standing Order 106, it will not be a financial interest under Standing Order 106.3, as it is neither personal to that member or shared by a small number of other people. Yes, Deputy Joseph.
May I declare I'm a landlord, sir?
Thank you. Deputy Gorst.
May I declare I'm a landlord and a director of companies which hold property.
Thank you. Deputy Jeune.
I declare that I'm a landlord, a tenant, and the chair of a charity that owns a number of properties that are also as a landlord.
Deputy Rose Binet.
I would like to declare that I'm a landlord.
Deputy Luce.
I'd like to declare I'm a landlord, sir.
Conotable of St Helier.
My wife is a landlord, sir.
Conotable of St Peter.
I'm a landlord in the UK, sir, and I'm not sure if I'm a landlord in Jersey. My son lives in a house free of charge, so my son and wife and the baby live in a house free of charge. So not sure if that constitutes being a landlord.
Thank you. Deputy Tom Binet. Deputy Brenneth.
So I'm in a slightly unusual position. Following my father's death, I'm in the process of acquiring ownership of some properties that he owned and acquiring probate. For various reasons, this is taking longer than expected. It might normally be the case, but when it is complete, my register of interests will be updated to say that I do own property and will be a landlord, and I'm also a landlord in the UK of a single property.
Deputy Gardner.
My husband is a landlord.
Prominent St Mary.
So I'm a landlord as well, sir.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
I'm a director and shareholder of a company that has one unit that it is the landlord of.
Prominent St One.
So I'm a tenant, but also St One have 39 units of accommodation.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? You're a
St
tenant?
One, I'm a tenant, but also to just point out that St One have 39 units of accommodation.
Thank you very much. Deputy Howell.
I'm in the same position, sir, as Deputy Richard Vibert, in the fact that we have a home in which my daughter lives.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Taddeo.
So, as is indicated in my declaration on the members' page, my spouse is a landlady.
Thank you. Deputy Moore. Deputy Moore.
Apologies. Yes, sir. I am a landlord and director of a company that owns property.
Thank you. Deputy Andrews.
I'm a tenant, sir.
Deputy Labby.
I'm a revisionary owner of a property.
Reversionary. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
I'm a tenant, sir.
Conataba St Clement.
So I'm both a landlord and a tenant.
Thank you. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. I'm a tenant and I have a property in the UK.
Of which you're a landlord.
I just own the property. I don't rent it out or do anything to it.
Thank you. Not sure that's relevant, but Deputy Ward.
Yeah, I'm a director of a company that has properties which we let out.
Thank you. Any other declarations?
So, Mayor, I was the first member that stood up, and just for the avoidance of doubt, there was supplementary information given by other members. So can I add that I am a beneficial owner of a company that owns property, and similar to Deputy Reniff, I'm involved in the modalities of a deceased person, and the likely further declaration that I own and am currently probably a tenant as well of the property.
Right. Any other declarations? Deputy Mezek?
Just to declare that I'm a tenant, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Mezek. Wish to propose the principles.
Thank you, sir. Today, the States Assembly has the opportunity to vote in favour of the principles of this draft amendment law and set the wheels in motion for delivering a fairer and more credible framework for renting in Jersey. We have the opportunity to say to the 46% of households who rent their homes in Jersey that we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you, that we believe that security and affordability are not luxuries, they are rights that every islander should be able to count on whilst trying to live their lives, support their families, and invest in their own futures. And we have the opportunity to say to the countless good landlords in Jersey that the days of having your reputation undermined by the minority who exploit legal loopholes are coming to an end. That is what the vote today is about. And so I make no apologies for saying that our housing crisis poses an existential threat to our future prosperity. And as a proud Jerseyman, that prospect frightens me. Speak to most islanders, your neighbours, your friends, your children, and they will tell you the cost of housing is the number one reason that so many people are losing faith in their future here. The statistics confirm it, but more powerful are the conversations we all have. My experience won't be unfamiliar to everyone listening, but I have lost many friends to emigration from this island, with them directly citing the cost of housing for their move. A few weeks ago, I went to JCG, which is an absolutely amazing school, to speak to A-level students there, and I asked them how many were planning to come back to Jersey after university, and not one single hand went up. If we do not resolve this trend and lack of confidence, Jersey is in trouble. Businesses will struggle to find and keep the right workers. Public services will continue to see so many key workers barely last a few months here before returning because of the cost of housing. And on top of that, the social fabric of our community will fray when people with long-standing connections here leave because they feel that somewhere else offers them a better chance in life. And we will all pay the price for these things. And you don't even need me to tell you that, because you're hearing it enough from others. So at the front page of the JP yesterday, the Chamber of Commerce rightly sounding the alarm at the potential effect of the falling birth rate and bean drain will have, making us a smaller and older island. So even the affluent and comfortable feel it, as many of them worry about the prospects of their children leaving Jersey and their hearts breaking at the thought of not getting to be a part of their grandchildren's lives. And whilst key parts of resolving this will of course be to provide more and better access to home ownership and better public services for those facing emergency situations and homelessness, we must also give a fair deal for renters, which they currently do not have. Members must understand, sir, that our current legal framework is outdated, ineffective, and fundamentally unjust. And despite the contentions of some, it cannot be made to work through more education or guidance. When the foundations are broken, it doesn't matter how pretty you make the facade of what stands on top, it will crumble. So our residential tenancy law from 2011 enables injustice. And let's be clear about how it does so. Revenge evictions are perfectly legal in Jersey because they are allowed under Article 6 of the current law, an article which is our equivalent of Section 21 of the Housing Act in the UK, which is about to be abolished there. We have fixed-term traps, which are commonplace because Jersey allows for a rigid fixed-term tenancy contract system that can leave tenants stranded when life changes, in a system which is actually unheard of in many jurisdictions, and again, is about to be abolished in England very soon. Rent hikes are completely unregulated, with no route to challenge them when they are wrong and unjustifiable. Hidden fees are allowed, which can be made up later on down the line when a tenant is most desperate. And none of these are things which are purely theoretical. They are real-world problems which cause too many of our constituents real difficulties. Let me tell you about a constituent who I met last year. She's in her 60s and has lived in her current rental home in the countryside for 15 years or so on a periodic tenancy. She has cancer, and her home is developing mould, which she believes is making her even more unwell. When she raised this with her landlord, she was at first ignored, and then eventually told by the landlord that they would just issue notice to them to leave if they carried on kicking up such a fuss about it. Now, sir, I told this tenant that under the rented dwellings health and safety law, there were legal minimum standards which must be upheld, and that I could arrange for an inspection to take place, after which a report would be presented to the landlord to outline the remedial works that legally must be taken. That constituent point blank refused to let me do this for her because of that threat to issue notice. She knew that if the landlord even suspected that she had complained, she could lose her home entirely and there would be nothing she could do about it. And even the Petty Debts Court would not have sided with her and overturned that notice, no matter how unjustly it would have been served, because it would still have been served perfectly legally under Article 6 of the current law. The law would have been on the side of a landlord behaving unjustly and refusing to maintain the habitability of her home, not on the side of the victim, even though she would have done nothing wrong and only sought
to uphold her rights which she has in other legislation, but those rights are rendered ineffective because of Article 6 of the current law. And so it can work against a tenant in the exact opposite scenario when one wants to leave their home. I spoke recently to another constituent, a young professional woman who had found a place to live with her boyfriend. They signed up to a fixed-term tenancy and had no problems. A year later, things were going all right, so they asked if they could renew and were granted it for another year, a perfectly common occurrence in our system. 1 month into it, unfortunately, the couple broke up, and she was left in this home, liable as a single person to pay rent that she had originally planned to cover on a dual income. She asked the landlord if there was a way that they could mutually agree to end the tenancy because of this. The landlord said, "Of course, so long as you pay this huge penalty fee and do all the work in finding a new tenant, which, by the way, actually leaves me financially better off than if you'd stayed. Otherwise, no, you owe me 11 more months of paying rent." And there was nothing she could do about it, and simply had to accept that she would face a huge financial setback that pushed her into hardship today and stole her security for tomorrow. Similarly, I remember a case of a constituent who wanted to assign her tenancy to someone else because she was a single mother and had grown to feel that the environment she was living in was not appropriate for her young daughter. She found a new tenant. She had it agreed in principle by the landlord to agree to an assignment and put a deposit down on a new home for her to move into. And then at the last minute, got told that she would be charged an £800 fee to assign the tenancy, even though there was no reference to this at all in the contract. They would not agree to formally sign off on that assignment until it had been paid. And so this young single mother, having no choice but to hand over hundreds of pounds that she ought to have been prioritising for bringing up her daughter because she was desperate and trying to do what was right for her family. And when it comes to rent increases, I've seen all sorts. I have seen rents be put up every few months. I have seen rents go up with just days' notice. I have seen rents go up by more than inflation from crude rounding up rather than considered analysis, squeezing and squeezing a tenant to the point of unbearability rather than fairness and necessity. And so it's no wonder that these things can happen, because the current law is completely silent on how rent increases must be managed. The only thing the current law says is that a contract must transparently state what the arrangement for a rent increase is. And of course, if the contract is wrongly silent on that matter, or the landlord wishes to breach it, there is still nothing the tenant can do about it, because they can be faced with an Article 6 notice issued to them in a periodic tenancy, or a renewal of a fixed-term tenancy denied for having the temerity to cause a fuss about it, thus rendering the one requirement there is in law about rent increases ineffective. This insecurity and lack of predictability on affordability is something that tenants are acutely aware of. It affects how people choose to live their lives. Do they bother investing in their home when they can be kicked out of it soon after? Do they dare start a family not knowing if they'll have a roof to raise them under? Do they turn down better housing options for themselves and their families because of the potential hidden fees to get out of their current home? And so I would ask the question, how many of us in this room are in the privileged position of not having to contend with these kinds of considerations in our lives? But here's the good news. We can fix all of this, and we don't even have to do anything radical. Just, some basic common sense changes, bespoke for Jersey, but inspired by the success of other places, to introduce a new framework that is fair to landlords and tenants alike, provides stronger safeguards against injustice, and does so in the most light touch way possible. So, sir, here's how we do it. The draft law seeks to improve security of tenure by establishing a new tenancy type that will be periodic by default, but does allow for one use of a fixed term when appropriate for managing expectations or granting the landlord the safety of a probation period with a new tenant. The effect of this, sir, is to abolish revenge evictions and therefore the threat of revenge evictions too. The draft law provides a crystal clear schedule of what grounds a landlord can use for issuing notice and what notice periods they come with. This list, of course, does not include illegitimate and exploitative reasons for giving notice, and it will provide clarity and confidence to help both parties do the right thing and will make any potential dispute easier to resolve at the Petty Debts Court if it ever came to it. And to be clear, it cuts both ways. The notice periods are more generous for tenants when their lives are being disrupted for no fault of their own, but the landlord simply needs the property back for personal reasons. And they are less generous for when tenants are at fault, enabling landlords to safeguard their assets when they need to. The law also seeks to provide greater predictability and affordability for rents. It introduces a light touch rent stabilisation system that will say that rent increases should be limited to a maximum of once a year with a 2-month notice period, and that ordinarily they should not be raised by more than either RPI or 5%, whichever is lower that year. But when the landlord believes a greater increase is necessary because they've invested in the property or they've let the rents fall behind market rate, they remain completely free to propose something higher. It's just that the tenant at that point will have recourse to an independent panel, a rent tribunal, for their judgment on the matter if they think something's not right. And lastly, sir, the law will require transparency on fees and charges up front. It doesn't set limits or caps, it just requires them to be clear at the outset of a tenancy so that they cannot be made up further on down the line when a tenant is at their most vulnerable. And so I'm proud to have received support for this new law by some of those working hardest at the front line to help people affected by the housing crisis. Sanctuary Trust and Shelter Trust have both written to scrutiny in support of this law, describing it as both necessary and long overdue to address persistent challenges in Jersey's rental sector. Caritas appeared at a scrutiny hearing to support the law, saying that they had supported islanders resorting to food banks after facing rent increases of up to 30%. Citizens' Advice have even come out saying they are supportive, due to the large numbers of people they get coming to them seeking help when issued notice or served a high rent increase. And I'm grateful for all of them for that, but I'm also grateful to the industry representative bodies such as the Jersey Farmers Union, the Hospitality Association and Chamber of Commerce for their engagement along the way, which I understand they found very reassuring upon learning the actual details of this draft law rather than the characterisations of it from some other quarters. Speaking of those other quarters, when it comes to our housing crisis, no matter how moderate what you are proposing is or how inclusive and engaging you are in your attempts to build policy, there will always be some who will never see the wood for all the trees, and those who reflexively oppose every reform, no matter how fair, how overdue, or how needed. Those who, because they don't personally experience injustice, can't fathom that injustice might be experienced by others. So, sir, let me address the bogus arguments against this law that have been employed by some. We can call this section the myth-busting section. Myth number 1, the proposals will increase bureaucracy and red tape on landlords. Sir, this is nonsense. The law does not ask for anyone to fill in any extra forms. It doesn't ask anyone to pay any extra fees. And it doesn't ask anyone to ask permission from the state before doing what they want. because what's proposed in this law is a passive and hands-off approach. In the first instance, landlords and tenants will be expected to just get on with things themselves without the involvement of the state. They can mutually agree between themselves as adults how they want to handle things. They will not need to proactively report to anyone, and the transitional arrangements proposed in the law also don't even require the proactive updating of contracts until they naturally expire anyway. In fact, in some instances, there'll be less red tape. The transition to greater use of periodic tenancies will mean landlords and tenants no longer go through regular renewals, which involves paperwork that can cost money and energy. In fact, sir, at its worst, the only additional requirements for landlords will be to add an extra sentence into the letter when they issue notice to their tenants and to fill in an extra box on their renter dwellings licensing form. That is it. And I would contend that if an extra sentence or an extra box on an online form constitutes so much red tape that it ruins your business model, you probably have bigger problems on your plate. The only conceivable circumstances where more red tape will be introduced is when someone tries to break the rules on evicting a tenant or imposing an unjustifiable rent increase, in which case they'll find the Petty Debts Court or Rent Tribunal will get in their way. And that is exactly as it should be. Myth number 2, the law will make it harder for landlords to get possession of their properties back. So not only is this not true, in some instances, the exact opposite will be the case. The process for regaining possession of a property will be exactly as it is now. You formally issue notice to your tenant and await for their departure. The only slight difference is that you'll want to cite a reason for issuing notice. The law provides a clear schedule of reasons for landlords to cite, a list that was carefully considered, and we consulted with landlords on what to put in it. It contains every conceivable circumstance where a tenancy should be ended, and some of those even come with shorter notice periods, so landlords can start the process quicker when things are going badly. If, as sometimes already happens under the current law, a tenant chooses to disregard or ignore notice and outstays it, the next step is identical for the landlord as it is now, which is that they issue eviction proceedings in the Petty Debts Court. But now, under this proposed draft law, we're introducing the concept of mandatory grounds for eviction, something which currently doesn't exist and will give the Petty Debts Court less discretion on when to order an eviction, meaning there will be less room for argument in court and therefore a quicker resolution. If the law is not passed, landlords won't get to benefit from that. Myth number 3, fixed-term tenancies offer tenants more protection. Well, firstly, sir, one-off uses of fixed-term tenancies will remain under this law, despite an appallingly misleading advert in the JEP from one stakeholder group in the run-up to this debate. If a landlord wants to manage the expectations of prospective tenants by being clear at the outset that they are only intending to provide a home for a defined period of time, this will mean that they don't get people applying wrongly thinking that it could be their home for longer than that, and that's a good thing. But under the current system, fixed-term tenancies are no guarantee of long-term security. In fact, they give tenants a regular moment in their calendar of extreme uncertainty, not knowing if they'll get a renewal. And it ties that to a specific moment in the calendar where if there just happens to be no suitable alternatives to a tenant, it can be devastating. As it happens, right now, I am currently seeing more and more one-sided break clauses included in fixed-term contracts that give the landlord the right to issue notice at any point, but not the tenant, who is expected to be bound by the full term. I can't speak as to how widely that is practiced, sir, but I can say that I am seeing it more and more often when constituents are showing me contracts. The new regime in the new Article 6 of this law will provide better security for both tenants and landlords. Myth number 4, there's no evidence of revenge evictions in Jersey. Now, I hope that this is a myth that will not be raised too much in this debate, as it has already been debunked on the floor of the chamber before. Yes, sir, there are no full-ranging statistics on revenge evictions, but it's for the very simple reason that they're not legally required to be reported. So how could we have full and unquestionable statistics on it? Article 6 of the law, the current law, allows for the passive application of revenge evictions, and there is no right of appeal from them. So unsurprisingly, nobody bothers to attempt to repeal them. Instead, they come to some of us as constituency representatives or organisations like Citizens Advice, who can tell you that they most certainly do occur in Jersey. The absence of records at the Petty Debts Court is not evidence that they don't happen here. It's also the case, sir, that the mere threat of a revenge eviction, rather than it actually being carried out, is enough to dissuade tenants from seeking to uphold their rights and is deeply harmful. So, myth number 5, rent control doesn't work. So this is a lazy cliche representing an orthodoxy of the past on which economists' views are far more nuanced these days. It most definitely is the case that some forms of rent control are well-intentioned but devastating in reality. But it's also the case that some modest forms of it, applied in the right circumstances and with the right flexibility, can help bring greater affordability to a rental market without disincentivising the participation of landlords. The OECD report, Brick by Brick, is a very good study on this, which says that it can work well alongside measures to increase supply, something which we are achieving in Jersey right now. What we're not doing, sir, is proposing some kind of top-down Soviet-style rent cap imposed by a government bureaucrat with a clipboard. What we're proposing is practically fourth-generation rent stabilisation, where on a day-to-day basis, landlords and tenants will just get on with it at their mutual agreement. But if a landlord pushes it too far, they have to contend with the possibility that if they don't have a good reason for what they're doing, they might have to answer to an independent panel. That prospect enough should act as a disincentive to be unreasonable and just make people ask that question in their head, is this really necessary, before they go ahead and do it? You could not get more moderate and light touch than that. So myth number 6, and this is a direct quote, the proposals are similar to laws in Scotland, which are a well-publicised mess. So this comment, which was made in a submission to scrutiny, is a travesty because I specifically looked at Scotland as a model of how not to go about this. So their system is permissive and has an overall ceiling, irrespective of circumstances, whereas our proposed system is passive and has no overall ceiling. They are therefore not even vaguely similar, so I really hope we don't hear that red herring. But so the final myth, and it's my favourite one, is that these measures are likely to drive some landlords out of the market. And it's my favourite, sir, because for some of us this is déjà vu, because we've heard this one before. It's the same thing we heard when the deposit protection scheme was proposed. We went ahead anyway, and the number of landlords in Jersey went through the roof at that time. It was the same thing we heard when the renter dwellings licensing scheme was proposed. And we've since seen even more registrations for that scheme than we predicted we would. But my favourite part of this myth was the letter we received on Sunday from one lobby group, which said that the rent stabilisation measures would force landlords out of the market. And then they showed us a survey result which showed that 100% of their members hadn't increased their rents by above inflation, which actually means none of them would have been affected by the rent stabilisation measures anyway, that they say would be devastating to them. So you couldn't make it up. The doomsday prediction is an empty threat. The fact of the matter is that these proposals will barely touch those good landlords in the system now, because much of it reflects what they're already doing and is best practice. And those who are worried, when they have to contend with the reality of what this law means to them, rather than what they're being told it means for them by the agitators, they will breathe a sigh of relief and wonder what all the fuss was about, just like what happened with the rented dwellings licensing scheme. They'll find that there isn't any new red tape or bureaucracy for them to comply with. They'll find that it won't be more difficult to regain possession of a property when they need it. They'll find they will have the leeway to raise rents when they need to. They'll find that they have a level playing field that builds trust in the sector and doesn't have their reputations tarnished by the minority of bad players. The only people who have anything to fear from this law are those who want to intimidate their tenants into fearing they'll lose their home, to force them into compliance, and those who greedily squeeze every penny they can out of vulnerable tenants. And these are not the people we should be standing up for. When those vested interests claim that they're standing up for good landlords in opposing this law, let us be clear that the only right that they're standing up for is the right of good landlords to transition into bad landlords when it's convenient for them. And I, sir, think that is an appalling argument. We should be promoting legislation that promotes good practice across the board, something which 99.9% will have no trouble complying with. So if the principles of this law are not passed, it's not the end of the road. I believe that what will happen is the same thing that happened under the previous Assembly when it voted down the rented dwellings licensing scheme, where it simply stoked up indignation from the public, who grew to view that previous Assembly as out of touch and beholden to unpopular vested interests at the expense of ordinary islanders. And the next election results reflected that, and the new Assembly passed the rented dwellings licensing scheme. Sir, I'm personally not scared of that prospect, but wouldn't it be better if instead of stoking up political interest and engagement through backlash, we did it through positive politics for a change? Instead of through failure, through foresight, show the public that this Assembly and its processes can work for the benefit of the public first time round, efficiently, without resorting to bogus arguments, and with the interests of the people at heart. That is what this draft law seeks to do, to create a rental market that works for landlords, for tenants, and for the interests of all islanders. Sir, I commend the principles of this draft law to the Assembly.
Thank you, Deputy. Are the principles seconded? Does anyone wish to speak on the principles of the draft law? Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. I will be responding as Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, which has been working hard on scrutinising these amendments to the law proposed by the Minister for Housing. And as Chair, I want to thank all those who've taken the time to share their experiences and views with the panel. This issue affects thousands of islanders and touches on one of the most fundamental parts of life, the right to safe and secure housing. Today, we are voting on the principles of the Minister's proposed amendments to the residential tenancy law only. This means, in broad terms, members should vote on whether they agree with the intent to update and strengthen this key piece of legislation for tenants and landlords. These proposed changes affect the legal rights and responsibilities of both landlords and tenants across Jersey. So supporting the principles today means we agree the law should be updated, but not necessarily what it will ultimately look like. To be absolutely clear, today we're not passing the law in its final form. We are voting only on the broad intent, the principles of the Minister's proposed amendments. And so in doing so, we're not closing the door to improvements, but opening the next stage of detailed scrutiny and refinement. The Council of Ministers proposed to the Assembly in May 2024 the Government's Common Strategic Priorities, and most States members supported these. It states that this Council of Ministers will provide more affordable homes for islanders and more confidence for the rental sector, specifically going on to say, and I quote, "Nearly half of households in Jersey live in rental accommodation, and it is vital we ensure everyone has access to a safe, secure and affordable home that meets their needs." It goes on to say that the rental market plays an important role in helping us to achieve this, but it must be supported by a modern and fit-for-purpose legal framework that helps to protect both tenants and landlords. We will introduce a new residential tenancy law that will improve tenancy arrangements for both tenants and landlords. Meeting this priority will provide the certainty and protection both renters and landlords need, tackle rent inflation, and make the benefits of social housing accessible to more islanders. If this is a key part of the 13 common strategic priorities for the Council of Ministers and was already supported by nearly all States members here, I cannot see how, as a start, how any member of the government can vote against the principles that state there is recognition that something needs to be done to update the law. There's already been recognition by the Council of Ministers that something needs to be done, and it should be done by amending or proposing a new residential tenancies law. So I would be genuinely perplexed how any member in good faith who endorsed a common strategic priority that calls for a modern and protective tenancy framework will then reject the very principles and measures required to begin delivering that commitment. So if we're to maintain the public's trust, our strategic ambitions must be matched by the political will to act on them. But as I said before, these principles do not define what we are, the details of the law. It is just saying that we are open to the next stage of detailed scrutiny and refinement in any form that we see fit as the States members would vote for that when time has come. So scrutiny's role is to hold ministers to account for their policies, decisions and spending in specific areas, and to ensure that proposed laws by ministers are effective, fair and workable in the real world. For this law, the scrutiny panel reviewed the ministers' amendments to examine the draft in clarity, policy objectives, legal impact, comparison with other jurisdictions, financial impact and practical consequences for enforcement. We issued a public call for evidence and received submissions from tenants, landlords, letting agents, legal professionals and advocacy groups. All in all, we received 248 submissions from tenants, 41 from landlords and 19 from organisations. We held public hearings with the Minister and key stakeholders, including Caritas Jersey, the Jersey Estate Agents Association and the Jersey Landlords Association. We hired an independent advisor, the Right Honourable Michael Tomlinson, who has issued us with a comprehensive report that will be published with our own scrutiny report. He provided us with 34 recommendations to work on, which we are working through, and this will be reflected in our report. We examined the clarity and enforceability of the proposed amendments and whether they deliver the protections and standards islanders expect. And we've been working hard, as you can hear, but 12 weeks is simply not sufficient to fully explore legislative amendments of this scale. And while we've made strong progress, we believe a few more weeks will allow us to deliver the robust, evidence-based scrutiny that the Assembly and the public deserve. And unfortunately, the summer recess has got in the way and is a little longer than we would have needed, but we do need a few more weeks to present to the Assembly our report, the advisor's report and our proposed amendments. So today we're clear that the principles, I would like to make clear that the scrutiny supports the principles. And now we can focus on refining the details and provide the Assembly with detailed information to aid a more detailed debate on the amendments proposed by the Minister and any other members that are willing to bring amendments. So this is why the scrutiny panel will be calling in this legislation, as we need more time to examine it in detail, to develop and propose our amendments before it turns to the Assembly and for our final debate, which we hope will be in September. But I wanted to tell members before this moment about what we've heard from stakeholders. As explained, we received 248 submissions from tenants, 41 from landlords and 19 from organisations. And these can all be found on our review page on our website, on the web page and the website of the States Assembly. And the range and volume of evidence we received underline that this law is not hypothetical exercise. It is a response to real stories, real risks and real gaps in the current system. Our report and advisors' report will provide more detail on what stakeholders presented to us, but I wanted to give members a flavour of that in general, the main themes that we heard. There's been a lot of misinformation and confusion about the law, making it harder for the public and stakeholders to engage with the real issues that matter. There is broad cross-sector support for more data collection on the rental market to inform future policy and provide clarity on housing conditions and rents. We have found that although most landlords are good landlords who treat their tenants reasonably, this is not always the case. And similarly, whilst most tenants are responsible and look after the homes they live in, landlords must at times deal with problems created by tenants who do not meet their contractual obligations. And although many tenants have noted in their responses to the panel's survey that they have a positive and constructive relationship with their landlord, it is clear that this is far from universal. There needs to be a balance between tenants' protection and market stability. Landlords fear caps or rigid regulation that might risk reducing rental supply, while tenants are really seeking long-term security, notice periods and clearer rules. There is need for fairness and clarity. Longer stable tenancies benefit both parties. Tenants gain security and landlords reduce voids and turnover. Clarity in agreements is seen as essential to avoid disputes. And there seems to be agreement with these things from all stakeholders. There are some clear vulnerability gaps and power imbalances. Groups are pushing for stronger safeguards and reporting mechanisms for unfair and substandard housing. We heard examples of tenants in extremely precarious situations with no signed tenancy agreements, no notice periods, and big jumps in rent. This is happening under this current law. There is also important for enforcement and practical implementation. All stakeholders stress that any new law must be supported by proper resourcing of enforcement bodies, clear communication and guidance for landlords and tenants, and practical, accessible tools to help comply with new rules. So from this broad suite of evidence collected, I hope members will see that there is real merit in seeking improvements to the current law. It will then be up to members to consider whether the Minister's proposals go far enough, or indeed too far, and amend them accordingly. This legislation will touch the lives of thousands of islanders, tenants, landlords and families, and shape the reality of renting in Jersey for years to come. Getting this right isn't just important, it is essential. The stakes are too high for anything less than a law that is clear, fair and fit for purpose. Islanders deserve a full and open debate, not just on the principles, but on the final details that will govern their homes, responsibilities and rights. And that's what scrutiny is here to help deliver. This Assembly should be bold. We should not be afraid of complex reform. We should be brave enough to shape it, test it and improve it together. The scrutiny panel has worked tirelessly and diligently to examine these proposals, not just in theory, but in terms of how they've affected the day-to-day reality of renting and letting. The business of being a landlord, the lived experience of tenants, and the impact on the organisations that make up Jersey's housing ecosystem, such as Caritas, homeless organisations, the police, magistrates court, and the Viscount office. Public trust in housing fairness is low. This legislation is an opportunity to show the States Assembly is listening and acting responsibly in the public interest. So with all this in mind, and as I stated before, the scrutiny panel supports the principles of this draft law. And as I said before, we need more time, though, scrutiny to be able to refine our amendments, to bring our report and our advisor report to the Assembly so the States members can also review what we have done and to be able to review that against the amendments of the Housing Minister before our scrutiny panel amendments and any members from amendments from any other members. And we need, I urge members to support these principles, to give scrutiny the mandate to continue this work and to ensure that any final legislation is trusted, understood, and when necessary amended. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to modernise our tenancy law, and I hope that we can do this together. Thank you.
Sorry, sir, if I may just, I was out of the chamber when we did the declarations at the beginning, so it's just to declare and say on record that I am with that.
Yes, thank you. Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. And I rise not in opposition to progress, nor in denial of the real challenges our island faces in housing, but in caution and in defence of balance, fairness and the principle of trust between individuals. This amendment law, however well-intentioned, risks tipping that balance too far, injecting rigidity where flexibility is most needed, and entrenching bureaucracy that could chill the very market we rely on to house our people. Let me be clear. Jersey's housing challenges are real. They deserve innovative solutions, but legislation of this scale must be proportionate, practical and effective. This proposed law in its current form does not meet that test. Firstly, let's address the principle of property rights. While tenancy laws must safeguard tenants from abuse, we must also safeguard landlords from undue restriction. The introduction of mandatory grounds for eviction, particularly the 6-month notice period required for tenants of 5 years or more, substantially curtails the landlord's autonomy over their own property. Many small private landlords in Jersey are not absentee investors, but local families who rely on rent to supplement their pensions or provide long-term financial stability. Are we to tell them that reclaiming their own property now requires justification subject to tribunal scrutiny? This law implies that landlords are fundamentally suspect, requiring oversight at every turn, while assuming tenants are powerless. Yet the reality is far more nuanced. Many landlords and tenants have constructive, long-standing, mutually respectful relationships. This law risks replacing that human trust with state oversight, disincentivising the very spirit of cooperation we should be encouraging. Secondly, I'm deeply concerned about the proposed rent stabilisation regime. It introduces an artificial cap on rent increases pegged to the Jersey RPI but capped at 5% annually, except where property improvements would justify more. In doing so, it disincentivises landlords from investing in their properties or even remaining in the rental sector altogether. The net effect? A shrinking pool of rental homes and potential increase in rents between tenancies to make up for statutory limits. Even with the proposed exemptions, such an investment made to benefit tenants or rents that have fallen below market value, the burden of proof falls squarely on the landlord. Third, the restrictions placed on tenancy structures are unnecessarily prescriptive. The law abolishes the possibility of consecutive fixed terms, removing a mechanism that allows landlords and tenants to have a tenure suited to their circumstances. Under this law, once a fixed term ends, a tenancy defaults to periodic, and landlords must justify any attempt to end it. Why replace a system that fosters predictability and flexibility with one that restricts choice? For younger tenants who are mobile or international professionals on short-term contracts, fixed-term tenancies offer clarity and simplicity. For landlords, especially those managing a small number of properties, they offer peace of mind. We should be preserving these options, not eliminating them. We must not underestimate the administrative load these new duties would place on small landlords, which risks overwhelming the goodwill of local landlords who have long contributed to our housing market. I must question whether these reforms will genuinely alleviate housing pressure. Restricting rent growth within tenancies may feel like action, but if supply of rental homes stagnates or declines as a result, the long-term impact will be regressive not progressive. Let's not ignore that stakeholders remain divided. While tenancy advocacy groups have voiced support, many in the Jersey Landlords Association and beyond continue to express deep concern. Their voices must be heard, not dismissed as resistant to change, but recognised as protectors of property rights and contributors to our housing ecosystem. Housing crises are not cured by even more regulation. They require partnerships between public and private sectors, between landlords and tenants, between government and community, and the provision of good advice, guidance and support for both parties. The danger of this law is that it treats one side of that equation, the landlord side, as if it were purely an industry to regulate rather than a group of individuals to support. Sir, I will be voting against the principles.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ward, do you want to speak later on? Have you got a point of clarification or something? Later on, okay. Conor St John.
Thank you, sir. So once again, I've been pleased to welcome people from both sides of the argument at my weekly drop-in sessions. I was actually surprised to see some, as they had told me if previous legislation were to be adopted, then they and the majority of landlords would leave the market. I'm sure that I'm sure other members have heard that claim again in recent weeks and days about these proposals. Sir, whilst acknowledging that the vast majority of landlords are good landlords, and I see we're joined by many who would fall into that category here in the gallery today, sir, I'm aware of some landlords who have not increased their rents for many years, with many others also actively helping tenants through COVID, often seeing their tenants as part of their extended family. Whilst we all know about the vast majority of landlords being good, sadly, not all landlords are. Like Deputy Mezek, I've helped individuals get support when really a responsible landlord would have acted without any intervention. So I've also helped landlords who have had issues with tenants, so I'm fully aware that this is not a one-sided coin. Deputy Furry spoke about trust. Sir, I'm sure he wouldn't need any reminding about his previous roles where he would have seen many cases that would have concerned him. Although I don't have any financial involvement, as my declarations of interest show, I'm the chair of the Greenwood Housing Association, so I should place that on record. As well as regularly speaking to tenants, I also get to speak to people who either would like to move to a right-sized property, and sadly in some cases, I just see distressed individuals and couples who have to move, occasionally with little notice. It was interesting to see the email last night from the chair of the scrutiny panel and listen to her excellent speech this afternoon, particularly the amount of tenants who have engaged in their consultation. Sir, today we are being asked to support the principles. We're aware of the work underway from scrutiny, and I do personally think the proposals can be improved with constructive amendments in a couple of areas. As Deputy Jean said, we aren't closing the door to improvements, and I look forward to her panel's report and recommendations. I'd ask members to be mindful of those in our community who are not able to own their own home. That could be due to their age, could be due to their earnings, or any other genuine reason. We continually hear of people not being able to stay on the island due to the cost of living, and in particular the cost of housing, described by the Minister as a housing crisis. So as Deputy Wilson's oral question 8 earlier in the sitting said, what measures, if any, are being introduced in the coming months to reverse the continuing trend of more people leaving Jersey than moving to the island, particularly in relation to the 20 to 29-year-olds? By supporting the principles, we all have an opportunity to show islanders, and particularly our young islanders, that we are taking these issues seriously. Like other members, I've received a lot of correspondence on this matter from both sides of the debate. In correspondence received this morning from Caritas, we were told that the changes being suggested are actually supported by many landlords who see them as very sensible and not onerous in any way. Many have voiced to us that they are helpful to landlords as well as tenants. Indeed, so I've personally spoken to landlords who don't have any issue with the proposed changes before us. So, in supporting these principles, members will give hope to existing island families, parents and grandparents who are keen for their family to return, parents and grandparents who don't want their children to leave. So, members will also give hope to those who work in our health, education and other sectors who are fed up of seeing people come and go as if we have a revolving door. So I encourage members to support the principles. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom. Debbie Scott.
Thank you, sir. I believe that the chair of the scrutiny panel spoke quite eloquently on this matter and why we should support the principles. Like many, have got some discomfort with some of the detail of the law, but nevertheless, and indeed, I believe what this comes down to is a definition of what is fair and what is proportionate. I have a legal background, and as part of that, I swore an oath to protect the vulnerable. And I also have a great respect for the ability of the courts to work out what is fair and what is proportionate. And there already is a role of the court in this whole area of the whole area of the tenure of tenancies and the ability to evict them. And I have a concern that as we go into the detail, that perhaps there is a bit element of heavy-handedness in terms of intervening in terms of the court and the way in which it gets involved in evictions. I believe that the Housing Minister, nevertheless, is right to say, well, there is an element of this law that is designed to protect landlords to some extent, because the whole process in terms of the law, the way in which the court gets involved, it can be open-ended, it can continue for quite a while. And there comes a point when you will actually say, well, you know, when does this end as a landlord? I am concerned about a lack of joined-up thinking in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of the element to which we are seeing perhaps over-regulation, because I come back to this element that, you know, you've got a court, got the Petty Debts Court, which actually will consider on a case-by-case what is equitable. And indeed the law, it reintroduces a rent tribunal, and again, that can be expected to introduce elements on a case-by-case basis of what's equitable in terms of rent increases. And indeed, that is relevant in terms of ensuring that we have a fair market. But I do have some discomfort, again, in terms of the cap, notwithstanding that you might say it's a cap with quite a few holes in it because it allows quite a few exemptions. But what that means in terms of the long term, what that means in terms of the whole macroeconomic picture, because the Housing Minister himself said that when one's bringing rent control, one's also got to consider housing supply. There's been an element to which I see that with the some measures that have been supported by this Assembly, particularly in terms of stamp duty, have got this converse effect of reducing supply. So actually understanding more of the big picture, and perhaps the Housing Minister might like to expand on the conversations he's had with the Minister of Economic Development in terms of overall, when we look at the big picture, when we look at the combine this with the effect of this stamp duty, when we also combine this, I can actually refer to a conversation I had on the bus, met a constituent who told me that she'd inherited a property and was considering whether to rent it out She's not going to. Why? Because of actual fear about the complexity of these laws. I do believe that a little bit more thought, and I'm really looking forward to what the scrutiny panel kind of comes up in this respect, that this law could actually be simplified, still bring in elements of justice into the system. I also have the concern about fixed term tenancies. There are different ways of cracking a nut. I do understand the concerns, and we have heard these stories. We can hear many, many more stories about injustices, about unfairnesses that need to be addressed. I don't have any argument with that, but there are different ways of cracking a nut. Whether actually just saying you can only have one fixed term and you will not renew it is the solution, rather than looking at the rent tribunal in terms of the rents that might be increased, even if you have a renewal for a fixed term. Or assignment fees, having a role for the rent tribunal even there. There are some alternatives, and I think that the actual work that's been done by scrutiny, a bit more of work there may not be amiss. So how to address those unexpected events that may happen to somebody who has got a fixed term tenancy. Again, an awareness that maybe they don't pay the rent, maybe they do get subject to fee. There's an element when the court can come in, and actually having tenants understand those rights to remain, those rights actually, if the landlord tries to evict them, to make their case in court is important here. So the long and short of it, I mean, the long and short of it, disinvestment is a reality that people have chosen, at least in my constituency, have actually sold properties and are getting out the rental market. Understanding the wider economic impact of that, again, in terms of the rental housing supply, but also just in terms of the impact on inflation when more money leaves this island and isn't invested in Ireland, but goes out to stocks and shares. I have been a tenant, I have been a landlord. I frankly do find it easier to not own a property that I rent out and to actually invest in the stock market. That's not actually helping our economy that much, I'm sorry, but it's a reality. But I do look forward to a time when we can have more and more investment in this island, which of course is the role of economic development generally. So I actually do urge members of this Assembly to support the principles. We know it's going to be called in. We know that there are injustices that could be looked at, and then we can go on to debate this more as we see the amendments that come in and actually have a bigger and more informed debate, I hope. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. I note the time. Is the adjournment proposed? Members content to adjourn? Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.